Indiana Jones has returned for one last adventure. The Dial of Destiny is set in 1969 and sees our aged explorer pulled into one last fight with those guys he really hates. So let's see if it's one last hurrah or just another nostalgia sequel. Welcome everyone, it is the Collector's Cut. This is a movie podcast. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
You should have stayed in New York.
You should never have went into Poland. Which, I'm annoyed you started with that, because that's the best line of the whole movie, is his response to that line. So I think, honestly, you did the cheap pop a bit too early.
It's all downhill from here.
You did the cheap pop too early, and I think you've borked it.
It's the line that I remembered the most out of this movie, which says something, but I don't want to get there.
Okay, well, we have been working through Indiana Jones. We did the previous 4 movies over the past 4 weeks. It is time now to talk about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the brand new film, which is out in theaters just now. By the time this goes out, it'll have been out for about a week. And we'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do, and we will give you a warning before we get to spoilers. And I'm warning David on this because he's very bad at actually adhering to this.
Look, I just really want to talk about that last scene. Can we just jump right to that?
So we'll get started, we'll dive into it. This one is set, I didn't catch the exact year, but I'm assuming based on the events in the film it is basically just on 1970.
It's 1969.
Is it still 69?
It's still 69.
Oh, some things, you could tell it was turning into the 70s, though. There was definitely some 70s-esque things in the, just...
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the big thing at the very beginning is that there's a parade going on for the return of the Apollo whatever number
11
astronauts.
Yeah, the ones that actually went to the moon. Yes, Neil and his buddies.
That made it back. Yeah. And they were having a parade.
I just thought maybe they didn't actually get back until 70. Because I couldn't remember what the exact date of the moon landing was. So maybe by the time they got back, it was the new decade. I don't know. Yeah, but anyway, clearly not. It's 1969, and Indiana Jones is now. I don't know if in canon he's in his 80s, but Harrison Ford's in his 80s. So I'm just going to assume
his age is the same as it. Like it follows with what is it? The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because of the way that like release dates lined up from the first trilogy to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they actually I think de-aged him slightly from what he should have been.
Oh, okay.
But this stays in canon with Crystal Skull. I couldn't tell you what age that is, but it's canon with that.
Okay, so whatever the year gap between, whatever. So he's living in New York. Early on we get introduced to his life as it is. We'll talk about that I think more in spoilers, but he's an old fuddy-duddy. Basically he's Harrison Ford.
I was gonna say they just had Harrison Ford walk around for a while.
And we're also introduced to another main character of this film. Is a new character played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Helena, and she kind of is the person who comes in and kickstarts the plot and gets it all going. And our villain of the movie is played by Mads Mikkelsen. He is a scientist who worked for the Nazis during World War II, and now he's got plans. He's got evil scheming plans now in his older age. So that's the basic setup of it. Obviously, the MacGuffin is the titular Dial of Destiny, which is what the bad guy wants. It's what Indy's going to have to try and get to first to stop all sorts of bad things happening. So,
I remember going into this movie, I was looking up showtimes. So I went over to IMDb, and the plot synopsis, I think, at the time, let me see if it's still the same thing. Yep. Archaeologist Indiana Jones races against time to retrieve a legendary artifact that can change the course of history. And I'm like, that's just all of them. That's every single one of them.
Which I appreciate, because it's not spoiling anything.
No, not at all.
It's not spoiling the goddamn thing. Perfect. So... yeah, so going into this, I wasn't really sure what to feel. It had a notably disastrous first embargo, because they decided to show it a good month or so, maybe even 2 months. It was a while ago now. At the Cannes Film Festival, they did an early press screening, and the reviewers from that press screening could publish their reviews. And it got I think on Rotten Tomatoes after that batch of reviews came out, which wasn't the full amount, but the 20-30 reviews that happened at the time, It came out to about 18% on Rotten Tomatoes. It was pretty disastrous. Now, when the general reviews came much sooner or much closer to the film's release, it went up to the 60s somewhere, and so a bit more reasonable, somewhere comfortable in that, just in the fresh, but not super high in the fresh territory.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really sure what to think going into this. Obviously, we had our own little discussion at the end of Crystal Skull, talking about our hopes, our worries, what we expected from it.
Yeah.
And going into it, like I'd heard one or two things, and we can't talk about obviously any of this now, but other than just it's a bit of a nostalgia sequel that's a bit overlong, the only other thing I heard about it was that it takes some big swings in the last 20 minutes or so. And so that's all I knew going in. I tried to stay away from any information. That's all I knew.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even hear anything about that stuff of the big swings. I heard nostalgia sequel because, I mean, as soon as it was announced, I assumed that it was a nostalgia sequel.
It's not a surprise that that's what it is, but
yeah, I went in pretty much completely blind. I think the only thing I knew was the name of the MacGuffin they were going after, but not like what this movie says its special property or anything is. It's just that it was the Dial of Archimedes, which is actually kind of a real thing, but obviously it's not magical or anything like that. And it doesn't have any like special properties of like spiritualism or anything like that. It's just a clock. That's it.
It's a very, very old clock.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll just get into how we feel about it. If you would like to start us off, David, as you always do.
Golly, I really wouldn't, but you're right, I always do. So, obviously, we filmed all of the other Indiana Jones reviews a little bit ago. We had a little gap since then, but I did go back.
It's been about a month, I'd say, since we did Crystal Skull. Yeah.
I did go back when Crystal Skull was released last week, and I re-listened through just to make sure, I know where my thoughts are. I know everything we talked about and everything going into it. And the one thing that we spent an inordinate amount of time on is this idea of the nostalgia sequel and whether or not movies have a reason to be made, whether or not they're actually saying something that warrants another movie. Going into this one, I was, of course, very skeptical. I think this movie had a reason for existing. I think that they had a story that they felt could be told via Indiana Jones, and it was something that they actually managed to work with to an extent. I think this movie does a good job of knocking on the idea of the age of Indiana Jones is over. We have reached the space age, quite literally. Astronauts have come back from the moon, and we don't really have a need in that world for an archaeologist anymore. It's all about the future nowadays. And this movie did a really good job of exploring that for about 45 total minutes of this movie. And then the rest of it is just, hey, look at all the chase scenes. And that's what disappointed me about it, is that this started off so strongly and then very quickly started evolving into like, okay, but he's an action hero. And so all in all, I would say that I didn't hate it, but it is just this mild disappointment, much like Kingdom of Crystal Skull, that it didn't live up to its potential of what it could have been.
Okay, interesting. I would add on there, you said it sets up all this stuff at the start. What I will just correct there slightly is that after the gratuitous 20-minute flashback, it starts setting all that stuff up.
It reminded me of the young Indiana Jones stuff, and I was like, oh, Pete's gonna hate this.
I mean, I'll give my proper thoughts on that opening forthcoming, even spoiler-free. There's some thoughts I could share. But I just wanted to put that in because technically that takes up a good 20 minutes. And this movie's 2.5 hours long, so that runtime goes to somewhere, and that's definitely one of the things it goes to. But
I realized as I got into the theater, I should have worn a watch because I had no sense of when this movie was ending.
But once it got going, I agree it sets up some of these themes, and I think for me, I didn't think the movie's. I thought it was just okay, right? I didn't think it was that good. I think I agree more or less with what you said in that it sets up some interesting themes and ideas to play with the character, but it ultimately doesn't really seem to matter that much once the actual adventuring starts. Once the adventuring kicks in, I'm just kind of constantly going, he's really too old to be doing this. I don't really feel like I'm buying it. Obviously, the problem that the last movie had kind of comes back here again, which simply is that you're not doing all this stuff with stunts, and therefore you're doing it with CG, and there's some particular moments that stood out to me as like making me sad about how just shit they were compared to doing, like, you compare it to any good scene in Raiders where it was an action scene, and how much poorer the action is in this by comparison. That was a big problem. And the sad thing is that I do think that right at the very end of the movie, it, like, I got what the director, like, was trying to do, and I actually like what he was trying to do. Like, there was a little moment right towards the end that I thought was actually almost poignant, but it didn't have the way, or like feel like it brought all the movie together in the way that it should have, because we had to spend so much time still making an Indiana Jones movie. And I know this is going to sound really weird, but honestly, a drama about old man Indiana Jones who's not adventuring to tell this exact same story would have been better than the movie that still tries to force it being a classic Indiana Jones movie for the majority of the runtime. The actual adventuring Indiana Jones stuff is the stuff holding it back as an interesting story and like with something to say. So, you know,
for me, the thing that immediately jumped out to me was the comparison between the X-Men movies, like any one of them, take your pick, and Logan, where there, yes, you can still have like little bits of action, you could still have tiny little things, but the core of the movie is exploring this guy who is just not able to do this anymore. And I think that this movie really should have followed that same sort of format of him, like, yeah, he's dragged along on this begrudgingly. He's kind of forces his way through it. But in the end, the point that it's making is he's done. He just cannot keep doing this more and more.
It's not just that. There is another point that it makes, but we can't really talk about it until spoilers. No. And that point's the more interesting one, honestly, that I think could have really been the heart of the whole movie. And sadly, like I said, we have to... And I know it sounds strange to say it's too much of an Indiana Jones movie, but that really is the problem, is that we have to do chase scenes, and we have to do villains going after the MacGuffin, and they have to chase, and they have to have this and that. And all of those things, I think, just detract from the interesting things that the movie's actually trying to do. To the point where, like, you get to the good few ideas that kind of sprinkle in at the end, and it's a little bit too little too late. But had they landed the way that I think, like, it felt they could have landed, it would have maybe been a special movie about someone who had aged. So someone who is not only moved on or is struggling to move on, but is struggling to even like really know who they are because things have changed and like what their place is in the world. And that could have been a fascinating story, but we have to do the nostalgia, and we have to make sure we tick all the action movie boxes that it wants to tick. And that's a shame, because I think it takes away from it. And as far as the nostalgia stuff goes, it's very hit and miss. I will say they do the let's focus on his hat for a moment thing, like, far too many times. Like, you get one, like, oh, look, he's reaching for his hat, or he's put his hat on for the first time, or someone's handed him his hat. But this movie does it like 6 or 7 times.
There's a point where he's dressed in just normal clothes for like most of this first half of this movie, and then he goes to an airport and he's handed a bag with his hat and whip in it, and I'm like, he didn't need those. Like, there's a reason he didn't bring them along, and then you just forced it upon him. Like, he didn't need those clothes.
Yeah. I mean, I can make an argument for that in spoilers, but it's... Yeah, there's arguments to be made for some things. I don't think it makes the right time. I've seen a lot of people say that they think this movie feels quite empty. It's kind of missing the heart of some of the previous films, and it is. I would also say we can't talk about any of it yet, but I will say how it handles things that aren't in here from the previous movie. While none of us really like the previous movie by and large, so we shouldn't care. The problem is that it makes the franchise feel very messy when it feels like you're just kind of quickly putting aside things that were clearly meant to be a bigger deal going forward in previous films, like
it feels like those actors who just don't get their contracts renewed in the middle of a TV show. It's like, oh yeah, in between the season finale and the season premiere, so and so had to return to their home planet.
Yeah,
and that's it.
Yeah, someone. The famous one I always remember. It's like one of the family sitcoms where the oldest kid now he's doing charity work somewhere in like South America now, and that's just what they're doing now, like all the time. It's just to explain why they're not there.
My girlfriend is currently watching through Family Matters, and that one's hilarious because for the first 4 seasons they have 3 kids, and then as soon as season 5 hits, they just lose their youngest daughter, and no one cares. Like nobody talks about it, and it's so weird.
I have to imagine the parents of the kid wanted them to focus on school or something. I don't know.
Well, considering that actress went on to do porn, no.
Okay, maybe. All right. Okay. Darker story there. All right.
Yep.
Forget I said anything. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, John Williams does do the music, so you've got that to look forward to. If that's something. Although to be honest, sometimes it just made me sad because it's like, he's not actually doing anything that impressive, but the music just starts. The theme starts playing.
Yeah, it reminds me of when the score for not Rise of Skywalker. What was the first one? Force Awakens.
Force Awakens, yeah.
It reminds me when the score for Force Awakens came out, and I like listened to Rey's theme and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, it's okay, I guess, but it's not like the original soundtrack. It doesn't like instill that sort of feeling anymore.
I think,
and that's kind of how I felt about this. When the original theme played, I was like, yeah, all right, having fun doing things. But then every once in a while, it'll go to like Helena's theme, and I'd be like, all right, well, it's there.
Well, I think this goes back to something we talked a lot about in Crystal Skull, which is when you have a series of films like the original Indie trilogy, which were all made in the same era, and they were all made using similar style of effects, similar style of like production values and ideas and things like that.
Yeah.
That when you make a sequel much later, when the industry itself has changed so much that it would be impossible to actually capture how those movies looked and felt without really going out of your way. And I don't think most movies that have these legacy sequels do try and go out their way to do that. And I think that applies to the music here. What you're saying is that, like, it's not that John Williams is any less of a composer than he was when he did the original films. It's just that, he's evolved, he's changed, he's not writing the exact same things as he used to. And that's okay, but it sticks out when you're doing a sequel and it doesn't feel like this is like one of them anymore. It feels like something feels a bit off. And that ties into like doing a lot more, CG or green screen instead of stunts, and how the action's shot and stuff like that. Like that there's a moment actually early on in the flashback stuff. I won't give any context here. I'll just say there's one point where Indy is running across the top of a train and it is completely CG. It's a CG figure running across the train. And
that was noticeable.
And it's very obvious because the animation just looks kind of stilted. But it made me really sad. That was the moment that made me sad really early on, because I was just like, this would have been a stunt. Like in Raiders or any of the original trilogy, they'd have had a stuntman running on top of the train. It would have looked impressive and fun and great. And here it just made me go, ugh.
Yeah, it's. I also want to say that the style of this movie, I don't think that it's Spielberg's style that was like the defining point for the previous 4, but all the previous 4 movies did kind of have this very stand back sort of attitude with the camera. Like it wasn't always right up in the action. This one, the camera is constantly dead center in the middle, to the point where it gets kind of hard to follow what's going on a lot of the time, in that it's very fast-paced, quick cuts. Like, eventually in this movie there is a car chase, like motorcycle chase sort of thing, and it was disorienting the entire time.
There's multiple, I think.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's... Yeah, I think James Mangold's obviously a very talented director. Like, I will stand. I think Copland is a wonderful movie. I mean, he's had stuff that I've not liked as well. Like Identity, I don't think's very good. I've not seen Girl Interrupted, but he's had very back and forth. But he's done a couple of really great movies, and
I didn't even realize he was executive producer on Logan when I said that earlier thing.
He's a director on it.
Is he director? It's only coming up producer for me.
Yeah, he directed Logan. Sure he did.
All right. No, yeah, there he is. My bad. That was just IMDb for some reason thinking producer is more important than director.
So you brought up Logan earlier and didn't realize that it was the same director?
I had no idea.
I thought that's why you were making the comparison.
Nah, that was just a happy little accident. I'll gladly take it.
So another problem, we mentioned the runtime of this is 2.5 hours, and I think there's nothing wrong with that runtime if it feels like the movie necessitates it. The problem with a lot of modern blockbusters, and I was feeling this during this movie, is that modern blockbusters just seem to think this is a normal runtime now, and will just do it willy-nilly. And there was definitely periods of this film in the middle where I was like, I feel like I'm physically ready to gear up into the big final act, and we were only just setting up what was like kind of the end of Act 2 rather than Act 3. You know, it was like there's an entire section in, I think, Morocco, and then there's like an entire section on a boat, and that boat stuff, like that's where I was really like God, how much have we got left? Like I feel like I'm ready to ramp up.
It was the issue of the MacGuffin that leads to the MacGuffin that leads to the treasure, instead of just the MacGuffin leading to the treasure.
Yes, there was a MacGuffin. So there's the main MacGuffin, which is in two halves. One half is pretty early on, but then there's a second MacGuffin to get to the second half of the first MacGuffin, and that takes up a lot of time of like following the trail.
And now
whatnot.
I have a dagger that shows me the line of the Sith blade, and oh wait, we've been here before.
And yeah, I was definitely feeling I was like, you could have condensed some of this surely into less MacGuffins and sped it up.
Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed all of the puzzles and all of the treasure hunting. I think that it was very cleverly done, and it kind of, I've always stated that my favorite way of it doing is the National Treasure style, where it's just knowledge. It's just, you know, stuff, and you're able to crack these codes and like follow these hints and whatnot. I enjoy those in movies. This did a great job with that. It was just too many, though, by the time you got to the end of, okay, maybe we could have had the hints earlier on at any given point here.
Yeah, I think it's just a problem where modern blockbusters especially in this case, I think just, like, they're all a bit drawn out now. Like, most of them, for some reason, are all running over 2 hours. But you go back to the other Indiana Jones movies, they're all about 2 hours or less, right?
Yeah. Well, it's because, and I've studied this, I've seen a couple documentaries on this, because of streaming, there is no such thing as like DVD sales afterwards anymore. It's all just a one-time thing. So when it comes to theaters, when it comes to showing them off, if it's a big theater releases, it has to be epic. It has to cross that $1 billion, or else it's just not worth the sales. And so they force it out to this length to sell that epicness of it, the same way that like heavier objects seem to be more worthwhile.
Do you know what's so fascinating about that is that that is a complete flip of what the thinking used to be. Back in the 70s and 80s, they would insist on you getting under 2 hours, or indeed under 90 minutes, depending on the film, because they wanted to fit more showings in a day to make more money.
Yeah.
That was the logic back in the day. Now, of course, obviously the big difference from now and then is that back then they didn't have big, like, 15, 18, 20 screen cinemas everywhere. Right. Now it's less of a problem because there's just so many.
I went to my theater, and there was Indiana Jones IMAX, and Indiana Jones D-Box. And I was like, this is a bit much, guys.
Which one did you pick?
I just picked standard.
That's fine.
Because I'm not a rube.
Yeah, I didn't have any fancy options, but it was played on like 4 or 5 screens. It's hard to tell because it doesn't break them up by screen when you're looking at the times. It just gives you a list of times. But
yeah, it's like you got to tell by how many groupings there are within like half an hour. And it's like, all right, those are all the screens kicking off at once.
Notably, that had like, maybe 6 screens or something like that. And then like Transformers still has 2, a couple others still have 2. And I noticed Flash is down to just 1 already. I couldn't help but notice that's already down to the 1 screen.
How tragic. Is that not already on Max? Can I not already just buy that?
Hey, be careful they don't just delete it from history to get tax dollars back.
Yeah. True.
I don't know if they could do that after a theater release, but if they can, they might try.
Oh, they will. They will do anything for tax dollars.
Yeah, so yeah, I do think the runtime feels a bit bloated. It feels like it's kind of taking its time in spots when I think you could just, and I wouldn't even necessarily cut out any big chunks. I just think you could condense some of it into a tighter edit and probably get it down a good chunk just by doing that.
I mean, I don't want to, no spoilers or anything like that, but as you were saying, the boat scene, that was strictly to get the second MacGuffin. I think that entire sequence could have been cut down at least to like 30% of what its current runtime is.
I think that's
because
fair.
There's just a lot of extra fluff in there.
There's a lot. I mean, hell, even so, there's a moment where they go diving in the water looking for stuff, and it's like a good like few minutes of just diving and looking, and there's like a sort of whatever, and like all of that did feel like I don't know if we need a lot of this.
They specifically point out, like, we are only allowed to dive for 3 minutes because of like oxygen stuff. They point out 3 minutes, and even if it was only 3 minutes, it still felt too long.
Yes. 3 minutes in a movie feels like a long time though, like when you're watching a movie, you know, like if you have a single shot that lasts 3 minutes, you'll notice that when you're watching it because it'll feel quite long.
Absolutely.
I suppose one thing we can talk about a little bit here as well is, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that in the opening flashback there is de-aging going on.
Yes.
That was one thing I also knew was coming to some extent before I watched it.
I figured it would be, just because I know Disney, and I know they couldn't resist. They'd be like, well, we have to, if we're doing something that's set almost in the 70s, we got to get those core fans in the opening. Clearly that's what it's going to be.
Well, that was the thing is, I said this before, but like, I can't believe how close this movie's setting is to when Raiders actually came out now. It's only a decade away. It's 11 years between them. It's nuts. But so the de-aging here, like, the positive side of it is that it is probably the best I've ever seen it, right? It looks convincing some of the time, not all the time. There's definitely... I
mean, obviously they have reels upon reels of footage of him at exactly this age.
True, which helps.
Just sitting in Lucasfilm,
which does help. But he, you know, like, it was the sort of thing where you got away with it for like a couple of moments, but this big section kept going, and there was an action scene, there was tons of it. Eventually there was moments where it just felt like his face didn't quite feel attached to his body, or just little moments of like just disconnect. That's the visual problems with it. The bigger problem with it actually right away was that his voice is his current voice, and it stuck out like a sore thumb.
Which is so weird to me, the fact that like the big thing right now, if you just look on like almost any suggested videos on YouTube, is AI voices. Like, that's the thing that, like, on a consumer level, we've managed to just figure out. And they just decided to put 80-year-old indie voice on this 30-something-year-old indie.
I think... See, I'm not a big fan of this de-aging in general, and certainly not of, like, AI de-aging voices. Like, if you get into a situation where an actor dies, like, when they're almost done shooting a movie or something, I'm like, okay, you know what? Finish it by any means necessary, whatever. And that's just an unfortunate circumstance. But I kind of like and obviously Harrison Ford's very much alive, but there's examples in like Star Wars and stuff of like resurrecting actors and putting them in the movie with CG and stuff like that. And I do think that we have this problem in Hollywood of like franchises always coming back, and they keep milking things over and over again. And at least for a while I thought, you know what, at least when all the actors are dead, they either have to do a full reboot with new people playing those characters, or that's it. They have to accept that it's over. And all this AI tech is just like sneaking in like a little demon in the corner being like, wouldn't be so sure about that.
You think that something as paltry as death can stop the mouse? Actually, how dare you?
I got the trailer for Expendables 4, and the tagline at the end of that trailer is "They'll die when they're dead," and this is making me realize that's not true in Hollywood.
No, absolutely not
anymore.
It's so weird when that's going to be because wasn't that a whole thing with, I think it was Back to the Future 2, is that they used Crispin's like likeness without his permission, and so they sued off of that.
It's a big thing that's happening now, is that you're seeing actors saying they're turning down roles because there's clauses in the contract that say, and part of your agreeing to do this role is that we can use AI to add in extra lines without your knowing. And if I'm an actor, I'm like, no, F you. I am never giving you permission to add dialogue that I wasn't willing to say. Never, ever happening.
I would love to see the movie where like somebody films to be like a hero of the story or something like that. They go to see it, turns out they're a Nazi.
The
entire time.
I think it's obviously it's a whole interesting discussion that could be had separate from this movie, but it just I was thinking about this a lot. In fact, honestly, one of the critiques I would have of this is that while it might be the best it's ever looked, the first like minute of this de-aging Harrison Ford on screen, I didn't hear a single word anyone said in that scene because I was too busy just looking at his CG face and looking for the cracks.
Yeah, it isn't. It's something that's going to get better with time. where we'll become more and more used to it. So we're not. It's the same sort of thing of like CGI. You know, you go back to the old movies. As soon as that first CGI figure pops up, everyone's like, "Oh my god!" and they're barely even paying attention to the story. But nowadays, we just accept it as okay. Yeah, that's there.
Yeah, part of me doesn't want to get used to it though. I don't want to reward them for this because fundamentally they've tried it enough times now, and yes, it's gotten technically better. Absolutely, it has because technology is always going to get better with these things. But like, I would like it to always be seen as kind of like a black mark on the review score.
Yeah.
Like it's always something we're going to look at and say, you know what, that still sucks. I don't care.
I think it's eventually going to devolve the same sort of way as CGI heavy movies and CGI free movies have, where one of them is viewed as slightly higher art. One of them is viewed as just slightly more like true to what cinema should be, whereas the other one is more just blockbuster.
It feels like a product. When I'm watching this like CG face and they're doing scenes like this, I feel like I'm not watching a film. I feel like I'm watching a product. And obviously films are always also being products. Like, they need to make money. There's no one's denying that. But there's a difference between that and it just being... And this is a problem I've had with everything Disney's produced for the most part for the last decade at this point. But yeah. So it's worth bringing up. We'll move on from it now because people get sick of us talking about that specifically. But I did want to mention it. Is there anything else to talk about before we dive into spoilers that you'd like to mention?
Can't really. I mean, if spoilers include even that first scene, then no, I don't really have anything else to add on to it.
No, I think we can just get into the spoilers then. So, which honestly, like, usually you can sum up at the end of the spoiler-free section, like, how much of a recommendation it kind of roughly is. And I would say, like, not really...
I'd say because we all know this is going to be on Disney Plus within the next 3 months, you can wait. Like, it's not a big deal. You can just chill out.
It's a safe nostalgia sequel that at least has a couple of interesting ideas, but it's still bloated and overlong and still suffers from a lot of the problems that those do. It's not going to rock your world. Is it better than Crystal Skull? Yeah, I would say it probably is, but like that's not exactly a high bar to jump over.
Has it managed to not be a stain on the entire franchise? Yeah.
All right, so spoilers then for Dial of Destiny. From this point forward, you have been warned. So, yeah, I guess we'll just start at the start. We start off at the end of World War II. Things are wrapping up.
Which one thing we talked about was during our reviews is, oh man, how cool would wartime Indy be? Being able to see him going up against the Nazis like during the war, and Disney heard us.
They gave us a little bit of it. They gave us the tail end of it where there's actually one little detail in this opening section that I did really like, which is that the actual thing that's important, which Mads Mikkelsen's scientist character, so he's Dr. Voller, right?
Yes.
And he cares about the Dial of Destiny, right? I'm going to call it that because I can't be arsed remembering its like real name, but that's what the movie's called, so that's fine, right?
Yeah.
So he's after the Dial of Destiny. He thinks that's the more interesting thing, but Hitler doesn't want that. Hitler wants this fancy spear thing, and very quickly, like both him and Indy realize this spear thing they've found is just a fake, and it's not real. But that's the one the Führer wants, right? And I mean,
are you aware of the spear? Do you know what this is?
No, what is it?
So when Christ died, to make sure he was dead, they stabbed him in the side with a spear. And it's always been said that whoever has that spear can like rule the world. Like that's an actual.
Yeah, I mean I've heard of that. I just didn't know that was this spear.
Yeah. That's the spear of. Actually, strangely enough, the name it goes by is the Spear of Destiny. So.
I've definitely heard that. I've heard that. Yeah, I've definitely heard that first.
A bunch of Destiny things in this movie.
What I liked about that though is I just like this idea. Like, sometimes it can come across poorly if you make fun of things from the previous movies, but I actually do like the joke that Hitler doesn't really know anything about this shit. He just wants the things that sound cool, and this thing is just a lot of bollocks, and it's no use to him. And the real thing is this other contraption.
Though it is pointed out that the spear that they have is a replica. Like, it isn't the actual real spear.
There could be a real one.
Yeah, it could be. We're not saying that one doesn't exist, but the one they have on this train is not it.
If they ever do like you know, Phoebe Waller-Bridge like takes over the reins, I don't think they will because the movie's not made that much money. I think this will be goodbye to Indiana Jones for quite some time, based on the opening weekend box office. Because they spent as much money on this, I believe, as Infinity War.
Yeah, no, it's the number 13th most expensive film of all time.
Yeah, and it is not doing 13th most successful movie of all time numbers. Nope. So, I suspect that they will be, like, I'm sure it'll do okay, but it's not going to make back the investment.
No, probably not. It's not going to make Disney money.
No. Which actually, speaking of the start of the movie, we were speculating how they transition from the Paramount logo.
Yep.
So I want to walk you through my thought process as this was happening, right? So
all right, yeah.
First the Disney logo comes up, and I'm like, oh, they're actually, and I thought, are they going to like transfer to a castle or something from the Disney logo to make that work? And then it went to Paramount second. Oh, Paramount are still involved. Oh, great. So they put Disney first so the Paramount could transition into the mountain or whatever it would be.
Same thought processes. Right? Yep.
And then the Lucasfilm logo came up, and I went, wait, you're not doing the transition? Are you mad? This has been a tradition since the first movie. And then the Lucasfilm logo transitioned into the lock on the back of a truck, and I went, that's a bold choice you've just made there.
I think that they had a preparation for anything, because one thing they specifically pointed out is that this entire sequence in the opening scenes was in the Alps, aka very big mountains. I think that they probably filmed an intro to work with any of them, and they were hoping to get the Paramount to work out, and it just couldn't. Which,
that's
the
so
fact
weird.
that Crystal Skull managed to get it to work out, and Disney and all their money here, having their logo finally in the front of the movie of this one, is like, nah, just fade it with whatever. Who cares?
I don't know, it's so weird because Disney own Lucasfilm, so you think that they would be happy enough to have their logos go first, like Lucasfilm was last time. And you would think Paramount would want the tradition because it makes their logo memorable. So if they were like, no, we don't want to be last, put us before Lucasfilm, then that's on them for being idiots.
Paramount pulled a mustache clause out on them.
The Lucasfilm one is so stupid though, because it's literally just a rectangle. They could have transitioned to anything with that.
I could transition from the Marvel Studios logo to that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. So yeah, it starts it off at a castle. They try and kill Indy. There's a whole big sequence here where an American missile like comes in when they're trying to hang Indy. And he ends up dangling after the bomb goes off, and there's all these like holes in all the floors underneath them, and it's a big set piece. It's a big thing.
Like, can I really, Joe, just point out in that opening scene, the bomb goes off. All the Nazis are caught in the explosion. Indiana Jones is just rocked by it, and he's fine. He's cool.
They're all closer to it.
This is the moment where he decided, like, oh, wait a minute, I'm explosion proof. Get me in the fridge.
To be fair, I think I'm not saying this is scientifically going to pan out, but I think the logic in the scene is that the explosion takes out the floor, the Nazis all fall through, but Indy, ironically, is saved because he's hanging by the neck.
I get it, I understand it, but I wish they would have made the explosion a little less fiery in that case. That's fair, because that engulfed him.
That is completely fair. I think that's the logic of the scene.
All right.
Toby Jones is his friend. This is the character we have to retcon in to explain why he's got a connection to this young woman. So Toby Jones is his friend in this time period, and he gets kidnapped by the Nazis as well quite quickly after running through the forest. Indy steals a Nazi's like coat and like impersonates an officer, and ends up having to drive some Nazis for a bit because he jumps into a car, and then some other Nazis get in the back and tell him to go. So he's just kind of playing along, which is but they're all going to this train, right? The Nazis are trying to escape with these artifacts. So Voller's on the train. All the Nazis that are in charge are on the train, and Indy gets on the train as well after a little bit of antics with the car and some machine gun fire. Honestly, this actually was a few minutes because there's a whole bit here where he jumps onto a bike that's got the sidecar, and the sidecar like gunner tries to turn the gun to shoot at him, but he just kind of like holds it out the way, kind of thing.
this is the first point where I really feel the difference in how the action was done. Like I said, it's very much quick cuts, very close to the action. It's very easy to get disoriented, and that's kind of where I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be different this whole time.
Yeah, because the problem is with these types of effects that they're using here is that if you don't cut away quick, our eyes will start to notice why it isn't real. Like,
Yeah.
it is not, which is why the action in the original movies, especially Raiders, was so impressive, because it was a stuntman jumping and hanging off of a truck and, you know, whatever, or climbing on top of a submarine. Like, all these moments felt spectacular. Which is why when he jumps onto the train and he's running along the top of the train and it's just this little CG figure, you're like, oh, this is just lame. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm watching a cartoon right now. So yeah, but there's a whole thing, and as much as I'm critiquing how long this entire like 1945 section goes on, I will say that some of the antics on the train are actually quite fun.
Oh yeah. No, I think that this sequence, the train sequence, does what I like from Indiana Jones, which you've already established, which is they give you the setting and then they explore every single possibility with it.
Yeah, because he's going down the train and he encounters like two Nazi, like, you know, rookies, you know, two young soldiers who are guarding the artifacts, and they immediately like give him a seat, Kyle, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm in charge," but he doesn't say anything because that'll give away that he's not actually that. And the great thing is he walks in and he kind of like pretends to grill them and, you know, for like drinking booze in their coffee or whatever. He sort of like, he gives them the evil eye, and he just casually picks up the box with the artifact in it and turns around. And this is like a fun little reveal where that's when they notice that there's a bullet hole in the back of his jacket.
A blood-stained bullet hole.
Yeah, so he's probably not who we thought he was, and, you know, a fight scene kind of. But it's got that comical nature that those early... Because even Raiders had that sense of humor, and I think that plays here in this scene.
No, this sequence does a good job of harkening back to the original like style of it. Like I said, it had that idea of give us a setting and then do everything else. But there's also very shortly after this, he runs into Mads Mikkelsen's character and does the whole thing of putting the hat in front of the face and then throwing a punch.
Yeah.
And it's all those little tiny callbacks where it's not overly indulgent like the young Indiana Jones bit, but it is still calling back to these ideas that we have from the previous trilogy.
Yeah, I think obviously this is the nostalgia section in a lot of ways, but I do think it does a decent job of, like you say, creating a situation that feels like it's of those movies and letting it play out. And some of the ideas are genuinely quite fun. Obviously, what lets it down is that every so often you do notice that it's a CG face on Harrison Ford, and you feel that, and you can feel the disingenuous nature of it. And it's just something that, like as good as it gets, I think there'll always be just a slight disconnect with this stuff. And it's, you know, and I think even when it looked good, when it cut to a real person's face, and when it cut to Toby Jones, there's just like, yeah, it's not as good as the real faces. It's just, it never will be, because it's a real face with real pores and just the real detail that's in there.
I mean, I do think that we will get there. I just don't think this is it. I think that this is, they did their damnedest, and they always say, because I mean, this entire sequence takes place at night. We keep him in very dark areas the whole time. They did everything they could to mask the issues with it. They know their limitations. But I do think that
it's a far cry from Tron Legacy, which I just watched for the first time recently with the young Jeff Bridges. Oh, that does not look good.
Absolutely. But that's what I'm saying, is that we will keep on improving, and eventually I think we will overcome that uncanny valley effect, but it's just not there with this one.
Yeah. So there's a whole fun little bit as well where he hides in the canteen car, the train. And he kind of hides, and the generals who are looking for him walk past him. So there's that magical thing where they've actually crossed over. So they keep going the other direction looking for Indiana Jones, and Indiana Jones ends up making it into where the generals were, and his friend Toby Jones is, like, you know, being beat up, and it's like, hey, the Dial of Destiny's here. We should take this. It's like, yeah, let's do that. Which does not make Mads Mikkelsen happy. He's very upset about this. So we get a whole big on top of the train sequence where Mads Mikkelsen goes up and he's got a gun and he's like, give me the dial, and they're ducking because there's a tunnel, so which is very... It's very both... The two things that made me think of were Speed and the first Mission Impossible, because they both have
there was
train scenes like that.
I got a trailer for Mission Impossible,
Dead Reckoning Part
newest
1.
Yeah, Dead Reckoning Part 1, in front of this movie, and they had the thing with him crouching down underneath the tunnel in it. And I'm like, oh, okay.
But of course,
I guess
I mean, I don't want to keep harping on this, but that's a very good example in comparison, because the reason why those Mission Impossible movies are still working is because it's so focused on stunts. It's so focused on actually doing some of the crazy stuff as much as they can. You know, they will actually dangle Tom Cruise off a high building, and Tom Cruise says he wants to keep doing these movies until he's in his 80s. He shouldn't. There should definitely be a I thought Dead Reckoning Part 2 was meant to be the final film, but now he's kind of like, oh,
come on.
Now he's like,
no, don't do that.
Now he's like, oh, I don't know. I kind of want to make these until I'm dead.
You can watch back that clip. Watch back the past 20 seconds. You can see the light leave from my eyes as you said that. Good Lord.
So we'll see where they go with that. But yeah, so they get this action sequence, and Mads Mikkelsen actually gets hit with like the traffic light on the side of the train.
Yeah.
Which,
so he's dead.
He should be dead. He's not, but he should be dead.
Yeah.
So that's all fine and well. And the whole sequence ends. Dawn's just about to come, and Indy and Toby Jones like jump off the train into the water. And you know that's
well, it's because they're on a Nazi train, and they're like, "Oh, hey, it's the Allies! Wave to them!" And then all of a sudden, the bridge blows up. They're like, "Oh,
yeah,
right!"
They're shooting the Nazi train naturally. There is kind of like there's another fun little idea here where there's a gunner on the train, and the gunner like gets hit or whatever, and that gun sort of like turns completely to the right, and because the train's going around a curved bridge, as the train's going around the curve, that gun's just mowing down like the train,
like all the Nazis, and they're climbing on the side of the train to try to get to Indy. So it's just a shooting gallery, all of them just taken out.
And you know, if there's anything we're okay with in movies, it's killing Nazis.
Yeah,
right.
I'm okay with that in reality too.
That's fair. Because that's the thing. There's a moment later on in the film when he first sees Mads Mikkelsen again, and he's like, "Wait, I know you from somewhere." And like 2 seconds later, he's like, "He's a Nazi."
Yeah.
and everyone in the room, who are not necessarily all, you know, morally like they're all shades of grey because they're at like this illegal gambling / auction house thing, and they all just turn and go, "Wait, he's a Nazi? We're not okay with that." And then it's like a minute later where the you shouldn't have went to Poland line comes up, which was very funny. That was a good line.
Yeah.
I'm all for the shitting on Nazis. That's definitely one thing. They have Harrison Ford doing this, and it works. Yep. So after this, we cut to 1969. We cut to where Harrison Ford is now, and he is a grumpy old man falling asleep watching TV.
Now, before we get too deep into this, I want to remind you how we ended Crystal Skull. For people who didn't watch that, who are only coming in here, we ended Crystal Skull with him getting married to Marion. They have a son, Mutt.
Who was picking up the hat to really clearly imply.
Was going to do it. He was about to put it up. And he had just gotten the associate dean position at, I think it's like Oxford, like crazy good college.
Yeah, Oxford or Cambridge. It's one of those.
Yep. So then all of that, happy ending all around. Fast forward 15 years. What's happening?
So this is the problem with doing a Last Crusade was meant to be the final one. They literally rode into the sunset. Then they come back and do Crystal Skull, and what can we do to give it a happy ending? You know what? He'll marry the true love of his life, the love interest from the first film that everyone likes the most. We'll give him a son who might be able to take on the legacy, blah, blah, blah. And that is an ending. That was definitely meant to be the end of Indiana Jones. And we're doing it again. So what do we do this time? You have to take all that happiness away. Like at first I thought Marion was just going to be dead, and I thought, okay, that's sad, but it's not like it doesn't ruin the happy end of the last one. Just one of them had to die first. That's just, you know, that's life. But then it's like, no, they're separate. I was like, oh, why are we doing this?
We've got divorce papers on the counter. It's not that this has already been dealt with. It's that this is happening right now to him.
And what I was alluding to earlier. It's none of us like Mutt. None of us like Mutt Williams, right? He sucks, right?
Yeah.
But on principle, it still bothers me that a character who was introduced as a main player in the last film, who potentially was going to be like the new lead character to maybe take the franchise on, whether or not that was going to happen. It bothers me when you have to write out characters really awkwardly like this, because it just feels like maybe they didn't want him to come back. Maybe this was a choice rather than Shia LaBeouf didn't want to. But regardless, it still feels like that. Maybe it still feels like they just couldn't have him rather than because it was a choice, even if it was.
Yeah, it's obviously there's no point in the story that was told. There's no point where he could have shown up.
No,
maybe just like a tiny little cameo or something, but he's never going to be plot relevant.
Well, honestly,
that being said, I think that they did a decent job of at least trying to work it into Indiana Jones's motivations and goals.
Eventually they did. It took a long time, but eventually it got there. Honestly, I think see, this is the thing. Even if it was a creative choice, it still feels annoying because it's like you're admitting that we didn't like that last one, so you're like retconning to fix it and get us back on track, and that equally just makes it feel like a messy franchise to me because we're having to like course correct.
Oh yeah, it makes me feel like a messy franchise, but at the same time, I'd rather they do it than just like force it, because that's the thing. They could have easily have left it be like, oh yeah, no, Mutt's fine, he's right over there. We're just not going to care about him. But they went the extra yard to say, no, he's gone and he won't be coming back. And that's the sort of thing where it comes into like, maybe you're playing a bit too much to the fans there.
Yeah, it feels a bit fan service in a weird way. I think you could have done this with Mutt. But I think if you do it with Mutt, you basically swap out Helena for Mutt. I think you...
Which is the issue, is that it just didn't work that way, is that it had to be Helena here. Because otherwise, Mutt wouldn't have learned anything at the end of Crystal Skull. He wouldn't have been like the son who went back to school. Well, yeah,
but we just talked about how they took away all the happy things. So I don't think they would have been beyond giving Mutt like a... Oh no! Now he's got a bit of a bad boy streak, and that's what going to part of the arc is going to be, because that's what fair. Helena's character in this is. It turns out she's not this goody two shoes like wannabe archaeologist. She's actually a bit of a plunderer and like auctions things off in the black market. She's got a...
Indiana Jones is an archaeologist. She's a grave robber.
Yes, and he does whip out the line, "Something belongs in a museum." He says that a couple times to her.
This is like 4 times in this.
So that's where we are. I mean, I think the Mutt's death thing doesn't come up till a little bit later, but the Marion divorce does come up in this scene where he wakes up.
It comes in basically right at the start of the second arc, or second act, being set on a television, and it's very easy to miss it. It's only once he actually dives into his emotions that we get the full confirmation.
Yeah. So, yeah, which actually, because they said Mutt signed up, he enlisted, right? And that's what led to his death. And I was thinking, are they going to specify what? Because, like, I guess it probably is just Vietnam. But if it's Vietnam, that's quite recent, because that's like literally 69. We're in the middle of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's at one point in this movie, the war is being protested alongside of this astronaut parade. So
I do think it's interesting that they didn't bring it up more. Like, if the war that got his son killed is actively still ongoing, you think that would be more like on his mind. Like, that. Yeah. I don't know.
Again, there's a point in here, and we'll get to it briefly, but there's a point in here where I feel like they touch on it. They just barely like rub against it, but then they're like, okay, that's not enough. Let's get back to the action.
Yeah. Well, I think before we get into all the adventuring, I think here's a good time to just talk about what I think the movie is. Well, because I need to talk about the ending, so maybe I'll just leave that.
Right,
I'll leave it for now. All right. So it introduces to this new Indiana Jones, or I should say, this old Indiana Jones, this new old Indiana Jones, who... he's got noisy neighbors who are young, and he's like banging the broomstick because he's mad about the noise. He's drinking.
They're playing the Beatles way too loud.
Yeah, he's drinking for breakfast. He does go in and teach a class still, but obviously he's in New York now. None of his students seem to care, and this is fine build up, because this is setting up. Because if you remember that first movie, they were all attracted to him. All the girls were all fawning over him, but now they're all bored. Now he's this old man who's a bit grumpy, and they're not entertained by him.
His entire class gets basically shut down by a group of students rolling in a TV to show the astronauts coming into town. Like, no one cares about his old stuff. It's all about this new age space stuff.
Yes. To quote Jurassic Park, I think we're out of a job, don't you mean extinct? That's kind of the feeling you get with Indy's profession in this.
Absolutely.
So
one thing that is worth mentioning in this particular scene, though, because it comes up in a big way, is that they specifically talk about this siege of the Romans against the Greeks and how Archimedes was there, and it's this whole huge battle that's this big turning point in history.
Yes. That comes up. But you know, we see what he's like with his co-workers. They're giving him like a clock. They've all pitched in and bought him this fancy clock as a retirement present because he's going to retire soon. And they throw him this little party. And of course, there's a little laugh afterwards because he just hands it off to a homeless person when he walks outside the building. Which I actually, this moment on its own is just mildly amusing. I actually think there's a nice payoff to this. Which is a little bit later when some of these people that he works with are murdered in cold blood by the Nazis and he finds their bodies. I actually think his reaction to that worked really well because it was like, okay, he doesn't really want to socialize with these people. He's a curmudgeon, whatever.
Yeah.
I think, like, I'm not saying he feels guilty for not being friendly with them when he sees that they're dead, but I think their death like just hits a little harder because he kind of dismissed them in his life. So, or in their life, I should say.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know, I thought it paid off a little bit that he cared about like reporting their dead bodies and his bloody handprints on the phone. Like,
I think it more so hits for me because they died because of him. If it wasn't for the fact that he was
that's
there,
true. Yeah,
then it wouldn't have been a thing. And he's like,
well,
oh God, like these people were so kind, and now they're dead because of me.
Let me dispute that. Technically, no, it's got to do with him. They died because Helena decided to come.
Right. However, if I'm Indiana Jones and I've lived my life the way I have, and a bunch of people start shooting guns in my place of work, I'm gonna assume it's me.
Yeah. No, I think there's a sense of responsibility. I think it's like, I don't think he's thinking about that clock in that moment, but I think for the audience, the way he dismissed the present they gave them as a nothing thing, and now they're dead because of him. I think it's a smart little bit of.
Oh yeah.
You know, this script is not very economical with how it writes things. I think this is like a little economical point that's made so that we feel a little bit more for their death.
The show don't tell.
Yeah. So, credit where credit's due. But Helena comes to see him. Turns out that she is Toby Jones's daughter, and he was obsessed with finding the Dial of Destiny, and that it could.
Because I guess the story was when they fell off the bridge, they said that they lost it in the river down beneath.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that I'm pretty sure we're shown that that's not true.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's necessarily a surprise to us that it was a lie.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Because I think, because we were saying this a lot earlier, but this is only half the Dial of Destiny, technically. There's a second half that no one has found yet. And she's there saying, oh, I'm doing this dissertation for my doctorate, blah, 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 and I think I can find this dial, and like we knew where it fell in the river, we could go back and look for it, couldn't we? And Indy's like, all right, fine, I'll show you that I've got it in secret, right? So you'll not go looking for it. But it turns out that she's kind of playing him a little bit. She was expecting this, and but it does lead some really bad people after. So around this time, we're also introduced to the fact that Voller, and this is something that actually happened in history to some extent, was the idea of.
No, go ahead.
The idea of ex-Nazis who were basically recruited to work on things like NASA. That's something that's been documented.
That was called Project Paperclip. Was the
very good
official name? Yep,
very good. But he's actually got a really interesting. I think Mads Mikkelsen is obviously a fine actor, right? And I think him as a villain is better here than Cate Blanchett was in the last one. Not because the performance is necessarily better, but more just because the character actually feels like more of a. He's got a goal. He's got a direct goal that he's trying to accomplish the whole time.
He has pathos. I feel his inner yearning to get this done.
There's a couple of good lines from him because he's got room service and he's been guarded in this hotel. And the guy comes in. Notably, it's a black man who's serving him his food. And Voller turns and says to him, he says something else first, but he says did you serve in the war?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I did this. I was helping in Normandy or whatever. And he's like, oh, are you enjoying your victory? And the way he says that just sounds so evil.
Got it. This is a great villain introduction scene.
Right?
Beautiful.
Yeah, that was the first of two lines that I really liked from him, was that. And then the second one was, you didn't win the war. Hitler lost it. And I'm like, damn, that's And obviously later on we realize that he thinks he can do better is basically what he's building up to. But like I just thought that like it's told me so much about him so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's a great villain introduction scene. I didn't see any problem with how they brought him into this and just said like, yeah, I mean, yes, we saw him earlier, but this is the first time where he is on his own accord. He's the one more or less calling the shots. And so to have him give this little borderline monologue of why, like, oh yeah, no, I'm totally going to do evil things.
Although notably, Voller here is not aged as much as Indiana Jones has.
Okay, so can I call that out? I was going to get to that. So I mean, what age would you say he was in the flashback? Like, probably same age as Indy, yeah? Around 30s?
Maybe,
like early
yeah.
30s?
I guess
he looked in.
I guess they slightly de-aged him a bit, but not to the same extent, obviously.
Yeah, and that's the issue, is that when we get to modern day, he looks at least 15 to 20 years younger than Indiana Jones. And it is a problem. I was because like, I thought that was going to be a thing. I thought throughout this whole movie that like, maybe he is taking some serum, or he's got some magic stuff, or he's doing something. But no, he just looks young. And it was honestly distracting for me for a very long time.
So just for the record, Mads Mikkelsen is 57, so he is about 20 something years younger than Harrison Ford. Just for the
and he looks it. I think that's
he does.
fair.
Yeah, like I'm not. If anything, he's actually even slightly older. I thought maybe he was early 50s, so he's actually looking good for his age. Congratulations, Mads. Which
is a problem though in this plot. Yeah, Harrison Ford does not.
Well, Harrison Ford looks good for his age, I would say. He's not supposed to be that age in this.
Yeah, that's fair. That's reasonable.
I think he's an 83-year-old man, whatever he is now. He looks perfectly fine.
Yeah, no, he's fine. It's just for like Indiana Jones, if they were the same age on the train, at the very least we can say they were not 25 years apart on the train. I think that's fair.
That's absolutely fair, yes.
Yeah.
I could buy that Voller's maybe supposed to be like 10 years younger on the train, maybe. Right?
That's fair.
You know, if you wanted to stretch it and say that's what he is, then that's fine. But but we're introduced so there's a lot of like players introduced here. So Voller's got like a big henchman dude who's like almost comically bulky, and then he's got what I'd call his main henchman, who's the mustache guy.
I mean, in terms of henchman, he's got the muscle and like the rat.
Basically,
like,
yeah, he's got them.
Pretty much the archetypes.
And then some red shirts, obviously, as you typically do. But so it seems like Mustache Man works for someone, but then there's a black woman who's called Mason, and she's like following Helena when we first see her. Like she's sort of like tailing her, and she's tracking things down, and it feels like she's working for Voller, and that's why I specifically pointed out she's black, because I was like, why is this black woman working for a Nazi? But as it clears it up as the movie goes on, she is working with him. Like she's from the CIA, and she's working with him because the president or the CIA are allowing him to pursue this Dial of Destiny as like basically a thank you for like helping get to space because he worked on that.
Yeah. Like he apparently was the main dude who did the entire Apollo thing.
Yeah.
And so they're just letting him do whatever he wants as you got us to the moon before the Russians.
But
here's $1 million.
But as his men start to rack up a body count, and she's clearly not okay with that, eventually all this is like, yeah, okay, the US is not really okay with you doing all this now.
As it turns out, when Nazis are in the public, we're not so okay with it.
Yeah. So yeah, and which leads to him saying, well, that's fine, I'm on my own now. And then they just, like, it turns out Mustache Man's on his side. He is an American. He's all for becoming a Nazi. So
yeah,
that's what we've got here. So when Indy's showing Helena the dial, that's where they come and they kill some of his co-workers. There's a bit of an action sequence here where he ends up like kicking over all these like shelves in the room.
Every movie, he destroys so many priceless artifacts.
That's a good point. This is the archive room, so there's probably a lot of like valuable things in here.
It's a smaller like New York college. It's not Oxford, but I'm assuming that they have some things worth something there. They had half the dial in one of them.
Yeah, but I wonder if that's just him hiding it there because it's like
Oh yeah,
you know,
it was that it was hidden underneath an Arrowhead collection.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to check that out.
Yeah, so yeah, and this leads to a big chase sequence. This is, if you've seen the trailer, you know there's some scenes of Indy on a horse. This is where that happens, and it's played somewhat for laughs, because they actually kind of like put a bag over his head and take him into a van at first, but he's able to get away from that because the parade kind of interrupts the route, and he ends up on a horse, which leads down to the subway. So there's a lot of like jumping out the way just in time of the subway train, which is fine enough, but I will admit my logic brain did kind of get in the way of this a little bit, because I'm like, I don't buy that horse isn't freaking out with these loud trains like going right past them.
I agree. I think that this was a police horse, so maybe it had like some extra special training.
They trade
for,
it
like,
in loud noise and stuff.
Yeah, maybe. The thing that got me though during the sequence was the fact that he ran down into the subway for the sole purpose of escaping these people on the platform. He ran down the tracks to the next platform, and they're already there waiting for him. So what was the point of that entire sequence? Because it's only then he hops onto the train itself before they can get on, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I've left my horse."
You got to fill the action quota, David. That's what
I guess, but that's one of those things where it just felt like too much. You could have cut it by an extra 30 seconds there.
Yeah, the visuals of him running through the parade on the horse were fine. Like,
oh yeah,
it definitely had that like that sheen to it, where it's like obviously a lot of this is digitally recreated because it's you're recreating the city and but this, I might be right in thinking this might have been shot in Scotland. This scene, funnily enough,
I don't know,
with Glasgow doubling for New York, which doesn't really matter because they've covered it in so many like old school like American flags and like businesses and stuff anyway.
Look, as soon as you've got red, white, and blue confetti coming down, you're in America. Yeah. It doesn't matter.
That said, though, they did have the marching band at one point were doing some Scottish bagpipes music. I noticed that.
Yeah, that's just par for the course for anything in New York. It seems like there's a funeral, there's a wedding, it's always just bagpipes. One thing it's just funny to me how much Scottish and Irish like stuff specifically seems to pop up in that part of the US. Well, that's because Ellis Island was there. Whenever the immigration was happening, everyone just showed up right there.
Because Auld Lang Syne's a Scottish song, Amazing Grace, I think, is Irish. Like there's a lot of just bits of that heritage all sprinkled in. Yeah.
One thing I did want to bring up, though, is that during this sort of he's being taken in by these CIA agents / Nazis, he's brought through the middle of a anti-war protest. And in order to kind of just like rile people up, he starts a chant of like, hell no, we won't go, sort of thing. And it gets everybody all riled up so that he can make his escape. This is where I felt like it just touched on that anti-war sentiment of this thing of his son went and died at the war. And like, he could have gotten like actually somewhat passionate about that and like understanding these people's cause, but they just never touched on it.
They could have also like done a thing that like, You could have like had a running theme here where part of Indy's arc for the film is that he's frustrated that he can't do something about the Vietnam War, and that's the war that his son died in. He can't do anything about that because it's this complex thing where, quite frankly, the Americans aren't like the good guys necessarily. It's a lot more shades of grey, that war, and that's why those people protested it, obviously. If you did something here where like it was almost a relief to him to just have a Nazi like go after, because that's a villain, that's a bad guy. There's a clear distinction. I can just go after him. I can like that's someone I can punch in the face, and it's
reducing the shades of gray down to an easy black and white.
Yeah, and you could have played with that. Maybe that's like part of what appealed to him about continuing this adventure at several points when he probably should have not continued the adventure and just like went to the police or got out or whatever it might have been. Because that's the thing, he's seemingly framed for the murder of the people that he worked with in passing, but like it doesn't seem like it matters that much at the end. Like somehow that's just cleared up at the end. They never explain how he got out, like how it got, they solved this.
Yeah, it feels like that same sort of thing at the end of Crystal Skull, where it's like, oh no, everyone in the U.S. government thinks you're a commie, but you get back and it's like, all right, who cares?
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So Salah comes in here and like picks him up.
Yep.
So it turns out he lives in New York now, and this is, do you know what this felt like to me? It felt like Well, we already did Marion in the last movie. Is there another original character we can bring back for nostalgia? And sure enough, this was the one. They got John Rhys-Davies out the retirement home. And
there's a pattern in these movies. If Indiana Jones is fighting Nazis, Sallah has to be there.
Joe, that's a good part. You're right. 1, 3, and 5. You're right. Okay. Not bad. I do think his presence works actually by the end, though, just in terms of what I think the movie's trying to say at the very end. But obviously, you can be a little cynical if you want to be and say, "Oh, this is another nostalgia pop."
I think that they included him enough in the movie not to. Obviously, he wasn't like a sidekick or anything that. He was kind of just there to push the plot along wherever it needed to. But I think there was a scene immediately following this where he picks up Indy and takes him back to his house. And it's basically showing, like, him and it seems like his grandkids at this point.
Yeah, he's an old man, so yeah.
Yep. And they're living in this like tiny apartment. And they're doing that stuff, and it brings back that sort of imagery of them out on that luxurious rooftop in Egypt, and like how well they lived there. And it again, I feel like it just kind of puts in that theme of we've outlived our time. We've gotten to the point where things start getting taken away from us. I mean,
Sallah even kind of says, I'll go with you, Indy. I miss the desert. I miss the sea. I miss the adventure.
I miss, waking up the next day and seeing what the adventure will be.
So I think, that theme is definitely there a little bit, which I appreciate. But I think, sadly, this is where the movie transitions completely into what I'm not that fond of in it, which is basically this up until the ending.
Pretty much. They make a quick little dip into it as they have that emotional opening up scene on the boat, but everything else besides that is just action.
Because he's going to Morocco because that's where Helena's going to try and auction off that, because it turns out she didn't even care about it. She just wanted to use it to make money.
She's in debt, and this is a way to get out of debt.
And she has her own short round who's introduced at this part of the film. Who is very, very capable at a lot of things by the end of this.
Yes. I mean, to be fair, Short Round was pretty capable overall. But this kid just takes that and bumps it up a little bit.
Yes, but Short Round, at least, when the show is Short Round driving a car and he's a kid, you're like, okay, that's weird and whatnot, but I'm assuming that he has learned how to do this. This movie specifically points out that this character, whose name I can't remember.
Teddy,
thank you. Has never flown a plane before. Because that's the thing. Later in the film, Helena's like, hey, can you fly that? And I thought, oh, he must have done flying lessons or something then. That's why she's asking him that. And then he's like, I've never flown that type of plane. I've never flown any plane. And I'm like, why would you ask someone who's never flown a plane if they could fly that?
So there was one scene, and I do think this is a problem with the movie. I am agreeing with you. But there was one scene when he's very, very first introduced. He's got like a makeshift like cockpit of dials and stuff like that. And he's talking to a pilot saying like, okay, I've done this, this, and this. And the pilot's like advising him on what to do next.
Oh,
so it shows that he is at least extremely interested in this to the point of knowing what to do.
I did not remember that by the time I got to those later scenes, but I will say that does not absolve anything I just said.
No, it does not. It does not. Because it came up that one time for 10 seconds and then never came up again.
Like, I have a hard time believing he would even, like, get it moving, let alone taking off into the air.
I mean, we'll get to it. It's a whole thing.
So, there's this whole thing, Indy shows up, and he's in his outfit now just because this is his traveling outfit.
Because we have to show him in his outfit for the trailers, and we already had him not in his outfit for the horse scene.
Here's the thing. Like, I think there is an idea that towards the end that I can kind of justify why he gives him his outfit here, and I'll bring that up later, but he's in his outfit, and he sort of crashes this auction, and sure enough, Mads Mikkelsen crashes it like a second later, and we get our exchanges that we've been talking about the, you should have stayed in New York, you should have stayed out of Poland, fun stuff. And then they do kind of their callback to the, the Indy with the gun and the sword joke, which their version of it is that Indy pulls out his whip, and then every single person in this plays all points a gun at him. And, that's mildly funny. It's all right.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think the biggest problem is that shot, as soon as the whip thing happens, leading to the guns, that shot kicked off what felt to me like 25 minutes of solid action without any sort of breaks.
Yeah, because this evolves into the chase with I believe they're called tuk-tuks, the little vehicles.
Got me.
I'm sure you called it that at one point. I think I've heard that before, so I think
right.
Confirmation bias maybe, but I think that's what they're called. And yeah, so like, in fact, they try to ditch him at one point, her and their short round. And like, but he ends up catching up to them, and they end up in the same tuk-tuk again. A big part of this is that her ex-fiance is mad at her and is chasing her down because, you know, she pawned off her engagement ring and he wants her back or something. Like,
there is no reason for this goddamn plot. Like, the more this plot kept coming up, because the whole thing is that it's not just a one-on-one chase scene where they are chasing down Voller. They're also being chased by this guy who, like, seemingly is head over heels in love with, for some reason I'm blanking on her name, despite the fact I just said it.
Helena.
Helena, yeah. Head over heels in love with Helena to the point where he seemingly is trying to make up with her over the course of this chase scene rather than kill her, but he's still also trying to kill her.
Well, to be fair, one of his henchmen shoots at her and then he like grabs a gun and says no. So he doesn't want them to shoot at her, even though that's their base instinct. It's to just start firing.
It's such a, and then like the entire thing ends because these places have very narrow streets, and at one point they go down an alley and his car gets stuck, whereas their tiny tuk-tuk can make it through. And it never resolves past that. No. Like, that's the end we ever see of him.
It never, like, he's introduced just so we could, well, I guess it's two things. We can have this chase scene and have more comedy in the chase scene. And I guess the second thing is just to further establish the type of character that Helena actually is. Because, you know, her being at this auction was kind of the reveal that she's like this type of person. She's not just this innocent archaeologist character. And this is saying, oh no, she's a bit of a scoundrel, almost like Indy was, you know, the way, because Marion always complained that Indy broke her heart and just ran off. And that's kind of showing that she's kind of like that too. This guy's kind of like her Marion, just with more, like, you know, attachment issues.
Yeah, I was going to say. I don't see Marion doing this, but fair enough. Okay. I guess for me, it's an issue of, I saw it more as, okay, they're chasing down the Nazis.
Yes.
That's their thing. They don't have any immediate danger upon themselves in chasing down the Nazis. So I felt like it was more so a function of the plot of, how do we get them to also constantly be looking over their shoulders for this entire scene? It felt more like it was a necessity of action than it was of story.
Yeah, because obviously when he left the scene, Mads Mikkelsen got his hands on this half of the Dial of Destiny. But of course, that's when the subject of where to go next comes up. And that's, you know, it's like, oh, she knows about where there might be, like, the MacGuffin that leads to the other half.
The knife, the dagger. It's not a knife or a dagger, but it's the exact same thing as
it's like
Rise of Skywalker.
It's just a tablet, basically, with like scribbles on it, with a code on it.
They call it the Graphicos, which apparently the whole... So I guess let me just give the basic of this real quick. So way back in the day, old ancient Greece...
Oh, is this history time with David?
No, I'm just saying in the part of the movie how it works. So there was Archimedes. He made a dial to, like, track the planets or whatever, but he decided, because of some mystery thing that we'll get to, he decided it was too dangerous and he broke it in half. The Romans wanted it, and so he hid it from the Romans, and he made a national treasure style riddle on a tablet to say, okay, the one half of it you already found, whatever. The other half of it is hidden in this totally riddle, like, you got to break all these codes and ciphers and stuff like that, and it will reveal the resting place of the second half. This tablet is the thing that they had decided, well, my dad knew where this tablet was because he's such a smart guy, so we're going to go rent a boat and dive down to the bottom of the sea to go get it.
Yeah. Well, it's not renting a boat, technically, because Indy knows it. Because at this point, Helena wants to just sort of, like, leave him out of it, and he's, at this point, for whatever reason, Indy's adamant he wants to be involved. And he's saying, hey, I know a guy in Spain or wherever it is that's got a boat and it'll take us. Turns out to be Antonio Banderas.
Yes.
But he'll take us out there, and so like they become this unit where the kid's with them now, and they're going out to find us, and they have the heart-to-heart on the way where he opens up a little bit about how the marriage broke down, because they're talking about the Dial of Destiny. At this point they're being more open about how it can predict fissures in time, and she raises the question, like, if you could go back and change something, what would you change? And he says, I'd stop my son from enlisting, and because that not only did it kill him, but it also, that death led to the marriage like breaking down. That Marion was inconsolable, and he was detached and didn't know how to like console her. So I was like, okay, you're giving me some solid things here about like the status quo of like your emotional state, all that stuff. That's all fine. I want to come back to that at the end because I can't really analyze this until we get to the end.
That's the thing. This entire plot regarding like his marriage and how he feels in general about the world is entirely ride or die on the last scene of this movie.
There's some good ideas and things we'll talk about right at the very, very end, but for now we're going diving.
They establish that, okay, it's deep enough that you do kind of have to worry about the bends, but if we use this guy's patented method of go down for 3 minutes and come right up, the bends just will forget to go after you. And so they go down into the ship because it is a sunken Roman ship that they've reasoned out has the other half of it.
No. It has the MacGuffin that will lead to the other half of it.
Yes, it has the thing that will lead to the other half of it. But the part that gets me the most in this entire sequence is that when they go down, Antonio Banderas specifically turns around and says, "Oh, by the way, there are eels down there." And then Teddy chimes in with, "Eels, huh? They sure do look a lot like snakes." And then Indiana Jones' face is like, "Why? What's wrong with you,
kid?" No, Indiana Jones immediately
just
goes, "No, they don't." Which did get a big laugh in my theater. Like a lot of the old people who were there, a lot of people who were a similar age to Harrison Ford started laughing at that line.
For me, I appreciate the line. I understand what they were going for, but in the terms of nostalgia sequel, when I view it through that more cynical lens, it's like you guys couldn't fit in a snake scene, so you're actively putting this in to replace the snake scene and then justifying why it is still technically a snake scene.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, all you really want is Indy reacting to the possibility of a snake, right? That's fundamentally it. Was to kind of get just by him suggesting they're kind of like they're water snakes, effectively.
Yeah. I think when we were talking about Temple of Doom, there were like eels being served at dinner, and we questioned whether or not Indy would have freaked out over the eels. Turns out, yes.
Yep, that's fair. So they go down, and sure enough, when they come back up, even on the way back up, they see there's another boat. So when they come back up, sure enough, the bad guys are there. Which is one of the running things in this movie as well, is the bad guys do keep just popping up wherever the good guys have went. And sometimes it's really like, because at the end of this boat sequence, when they've ran off with the tablet and they figure things out, like... Yeah. It turns out, because it looked like Helena was for money telling everything Mads Mikkelsen wanted to know. She was giving him all the clues and all that. And it turned out she did, but she kind of interpreted them incorrectly to lead them in the wrong direction. And Mads Mikkelsen, being left stranded on their old boat, looks in the binoculars and says, "They're heading east, not west." And somehow they end up in the exact location very quickly.
That was the... you saying that they keep on showing up somehow. I feel like they justified it pretty well throughout the movie of explaining like here's how they managed to come to the same location. This is the first time where I'm like, they must have added this in post, because there's no way that this makes any damn sense.
It just kind of like, okay, so they're going in the other direction, but there's still a lot of places in that side of the planet. There's
Believe it or not, you go far enough that way, you end up on that way. Like, it's a whole thing.
So it's not. I mean, it's a small thing, but it stuck out to me as like a weird little moment.
Yeah,
but
same.
The whole thing here is that it seems like Indy's refusing to translate the tablet because none of their guys can do it. But Helena chimes in, is like, "I'll do it for $100,000." But obviously, she's just stalling. She's just buying time. She's got dynamite in her pocket to use, which they did show.
She's a rational person.
They did show her finding the dynamite.
Yes.
Earlier on the boat, so it's not like a weird out of nowhere thing. That's right before she flirts with what I'm just going to call the red shirt who dies by the eels in the water.
Did he die by the eels?
Well, it wasn't the eels. I think he died because his line got cut when they were swimming back up.
Yeah, they cut his oxygen.
But I think the eels might have ate him after he went down.
I'm sure. They're voracious.
Yeah. So whatever. So they go to, I think was it Sicily they went to after this?
They went to Archimedes' tomb in Sicily.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's underneath like a landmark, so there's tourists everywhere. So they're just killing time during the day. I noticed there was like multiple scenes in this movie, and it was annoying because it was making me hungry, where Helena got like street food and was just eating street food. She did it like 2 or 3 times and it always looked kind of good. Like it always looked like some sort of wrap or some kind of, I don't know, some local thing, but yeah, it always looked good.
Yeah. I mean, I made sure I'm very bad whenever I go see a theater movie in that I finish my snacks before the previews are even done. So I made sure to really pace myself, and luckily I still had a couple left every time one of these eating scenes happened.
It's the sort of thing where I held strong, but there was a lot of fast food places near the cinema. I could have very easily went and devoured something, and I didn't, but I could have.
Good job.
So yeah, unfortunately though, the kid, Teddy, just runs into Mads Mikkelsen. He just goes round a corner and Mads Mikkelsen standing there in silhouette all ominously.
This is the part of the movie I like to call contrivances, where, yeah, okay, sure, why not?
Well, this was the thing. Like, see when they were like setting up, even before they went on the boat, and they're like, okay, we have to go find this thing. I thought they were setting up the thing they were going to go find that would be like the final act of the movie. So when they found the thing, it's like, no, this is leading us to the next thing that's actually the thing. So this entire sort of like the boat stuff and then all this stuff here, and even get into the tomb and going to find the other half of the dial, all of this was where I was really feeling the runtime. I was really feeling it stretched out here.
I agree. However, once they started like solving the puzzles from Archimedes of like the water displacement and stuff, that's where I was all in. I was like, okay, yeah, we're going down in the tomb. I'm enjoying this.
But that's after a long build up of going through caves and
But that's also the issue that I had as we'll get to it. This still isn't the end. We still keep going. If this were like building up to the final set piece, I'd be like, yeah, great, cool, but we still keep going.
And not to mention, because they're trying to beat the Nazis to where this tomb is, there's another car chase segment where they steal like a car of like someone who just got married, because there's all the little things at the back, the cans and stuff. So we get another big driving scene. So, which is fine. Like arguably maybe a little repetitive at this point, given that we've already had the horse chase in the city, we had the tuk-tuks before Morocco, and now we've got this driving scene.
We had the motorcycle in the opening.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I think it's because car chase is one of those things where Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford does not have to be there. You can have anybody just filling in. So it's an easy quote-unquote stunt to do to build up the action that doesn't actually require him to do anything.
Well, yeah, I think it's less that he has to be there or not be there as it is just, this is something that his character can do while he's just sitting down, and therefore it's not unrealistic as such compared to, leaping and jumping and climbing. And
there's a point when they're making their way through the cave where he's just like clinging to the edge of the wall, and Helena's like, you good? You haven't moved in a while. And he's just like, I'm thinking about how I have these bolts in one leg and these plates in another, and I'm climbing up this thing. And I'm like, yeah, why are you doing this, Indiana Jones? This seems a bit out of your element.
Yeah. So they get to the dial, right? And it's in the skeleton of the dude. And they get a dial. But there's a couple of things they notice. Now, I want to return to something that's been coming up recently. We were saying early on, they said fissures in time. This is what this thing predicts. And then, what would you do if you could go back and change something? So, because I'd heard it makes big swings in the last 20 minutes, like, immediately I was thinking, okay, we're going to time travel. The question is where are we time traveling to? And I had a few different ideas. Obviously, this scene does imply some, like... So, this scene, like, the skeleton's wearing a watch, which shouldn't exist in the time period this guy comes from. And also the carvings on the side of the crypt have propellers in them, which also shouldn't exist in this time period, which definitely implies that some time traveling goes on and he sees some things or even gets some things that he shouldn't have had, which is fine. But there was a period where I wasn't necessarily thinking they were going to do the obvious thing of just neatly tying those things, which it ultimately does, where literally they go back far enough to meet this guy, he gets a watch, and he sees a plane, so he has the propellers, right?
Lord.
Right, whatever. But there was a moment where Mads Mikkelsen's got all the bits together, and they're going on the plane, and he's doing all the thing, and then Indiana Jones points out at the last second as they're flying towards this fissure, which is the eye of a storm, and Indiana Jones just starts yelling, "Continental drift! Continental drift!" He wouldn't have known about
it. Everyone's like, oh, geez, he's having an episode.
These numbers are off. This because, so yeah, I mean, we're here now. Mads Mikkelsen's plan is to use the Dial of Destiny to go back to 1939 and kill Hitler and take over as the leader of Nazi Germany, because he thinks he will succeed and he won't lose the war, and partly because he has, like, you know, advanced knowledge of better, like, you know, explosives, nuclear bombs, things like that they didn't have at the time.
Even just the strategies, like he knows like what D-Day would be. He's easily able to do that.
I think he specifically says though that he's going to upgrade their missiles, because like he knows a lot of, you know, more missile tech from the future. Yeah. So
okay.
Right, so go on, before,
no, fine. Go ahead.
So that's his plan. He wants to go back in time to that specific time period, and when Indy starts yelling "Continental drift," your numbers are off. Wherever we are going, it's not 1939. There was a part of me, and I'm not saying I wanted this. I'm not saying this would have been a good choice, but part of me genuinely thought that when they went through this time vortex, or whatever you want to call it, this naturally occurring thing, by the way, this is not something the dial creates. It just knows to send us to where these things happen. Mm-hmm. I genuinely thought they might pop out in present day. Like, it was running in my head where I thought, holy shit, are they going to like show up in like present day New York City and see all the newer buildings? Are they going to like witness something? Is Indy going to see, I don't know, like...
Okay, so just to really go back here, this was hinted at throughout the movie because they had one of the Basil's notes showed two dates, one of which was like August whatever 1969, which was a couple days away, and the other was August whatever 1939.
Yeah.
And so with that hint throughout the thing, we're like, okay, they're talking about time fissures. These two dates are right next to each other. One would lead us to assume that we're going to fold up a piece of paper and stick a pencil through it and say, this is how this is going to work. But same as you, the moment that he started yelling about continental drift, immediately my mind was, okay, he wouldn't be saying it, just in terms of plot, he wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't about to affect them.
Yes.
So either they're going... I had three options in mind. Way back to the past, because obviously we had Archimedes in his tomb wearing a watch at that
which
point.
Turns out to be exactly what happens, yes.
Which does... That seemed the most obvious to me. The second one, and it was like the moment that like they really started panicking and stuff like that, that I was like, same on you. I think we might be going back to like present day. I think we might be setting that up. And immediately my mind races with those options. But then the third option I had was, okay, well, they keep on saying that like it's just a few degrees off. It's just a tiny bit off. So I was thinking maybe this is, instead of it putting it in like 1939 of, you know, right when Hitler's rising to power, it's instead going to go back to like right when Temple of Doom was happening. And we were going to just loop back 100% on Indiana's full adventures.
You thought we might do some Back to the Future Part 2 style, like we're in the other movie. Yeah, okay, yeah, that definitely was a possibility that they might do for ultra nostalgia stuff.
Full pop off. You have them, you show the exact same scenes and he's just creeping along in the background.
Alternatively, maybe they would have paid off like the Mutt thing by actually having them like by accident ending up like when Mutt was still alive, and you know, I didn't know if Shia was going to have a cameo. I mean, it was possible. Who knows?
I mean, that was the one thing I did know about this movie, was that Marion was going to be in it.
Yeah,
or at least she was on the cast list, and yet she wasn't yet. So I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to be missing.
Yeah, maybe time travel's how we get to her somehow.
Yep. And I was the moment they were saying like first off, the moment they brought up time fissures, I was already just shouting in my head like time loop, time loop, time loop. Like make it come full circle. Make this the beginning of Temple of Doom, so that it's just a whole thing. An Ouroboros.
I will say that the clues on the crypt of like someone has gone to the past, like I was a little disappointed where it just became like, because these are the tried and true tropes of any time travel movie, is you put in a seed like that and then later on you pay off how he gets these things. But it's so just like straightforward with this one. There's the like, he literally has a watch, like a present day watch, and he has, you know, obviously these propellers are on the thing. I kind of hated that it was just as simple as they go back, he sees the plane, and he picks up the watch. Like there's like nothing interesting to how he actually gets those items, other than the fact that they've traveled back in time.
Okay, so one thing that I want to bring up here, and we'll bring it up more as we discuss how this scene plays out.
Yeah.
But they bring up this idea almost immediately as soon as they land, because once they come out, they are in the middle of like a siege. They're in the middle of that battle.
Yeah, the Romans and
Indiana
stuff,
Jones talked about. The siege of Syracuse. So the Nazis, having their plane be fired upon by these catapults, start shooting people. And they bring up this concept of, we're messing with the past. Like, is this Back to the Future rules? Are we going to go to the Biff Tannen future now? Like, is this going to be an issue?
I mean, I didn't really think that, really, just because we're so late into this movie that there's no way we have time to resolve stuff like that. But
I was thinking, like, are we going to do a thing where we're going to come out of this and it's going to be a slightly different future, aka maybe one where Mutt survives.
Yeah.
Maybe just tiny little changes to make his life better. But then this movie goes full tilt in that somehow they could mess with the past, or at least they think they would be messing with the past if they like did more things there. But also Archimedes still had the watch and the propellers, which means that this past already happened and we're in like a stable time loop.
Yeah. So, but basically it's saying that Indy and Co were always going to travel back and do this. Right? This was always part of the timeline, yeah.
Which means however this plot ended, it was always meant to end that way. Which, I mean, let's just talk about what happens while they're there so I can fully explain my feelings on that.
Well, I will say, I guess the two things to talk about first. One small thing, I actually really did enjoy just how much Mads and the other Nazis were panicking when they realized it wasn't where they were supposed to go, and then when they actually see all this stuff, and like Mads Mikkelsen's like, shit, like we're not where I want to be, we have to go back, that portal's going to close. When they're panicking and then ultimately just like crash and die. In fact, one of them even gets one of the big spears like just like through them, you know?
Yeah. It's gruesome as hell.
Yeah. Like that was entertaining. Like watching these Nazis realize we're effed was actually really entertaining.
It's even better because in going there, they got into full cosplay.
Oh yeah, they're all wearing their
come out in
outfits,
1930. So you're seeing like actual Nazis get impaled. It's beautiful.
It's great. So that's the whole thing, and of course this is where on the little plane behind them, and this is really just to justify how Indy and Co get home after, because obviously the big plane that the Nazis were on is destroyed, is that we have to have a second plane come in, so that's why the kids flying this other plane in after them, just so there's a way for them to get home, which is really funny. Like before we even talk about what happens or whatever, I do think it's an interesting choice that it just cuts to everything. Like I thought there was going to be like a oh, it's closing, we have to just make it in the nick of time kind of scene, and there wasn't any of that. I just cut forward to when they were already back. But
hard cut, we're done with the plot now.
So I guess that the big topic to bring up though here, before we even talk about the specifics of what happens, because that's where we're going to get into like the actual what I think the director really wanted to do with this movie, is just how do you feel about them doing time travel at the end of an Indiana Jones movie, in the same way that the last one did aliens by the end. How do you feel about the time travel?
So I mean, just flat out, I think it's too much. I think if you've literally now had Indy conquer space and time, like it's just a bit too much. That being said, I enjoyed it. Like once it got to that part, I realized like, all right, they're just going for the cheap pops here. I'm just going to enjoy it. I'm just going to close off the part of my brain that's going to be like, oh, well, the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was so much more toned down than this. I'm just going to be like, no, we're just having fun. Let's just enjoy it. And I did enjoy it. But coming back to it, talking about it critically, it is way too, like you were saying, it's a big swing.
It's a huge swing. Because it's not like saying that something might happen or something could happen. And there's just, because there's even a scene earlier on, and it might even be the scene where he talks about Mutt a bit, where he's saying that, you know, he doesn't believe in the supernatural, but he has seen things, you know, that he can't quite explain. And I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you said that, Indy, because like you have seen some shit, like over the at least the you know, the, like, hell, the last movie ended with you seeing a UFO rise up out the ground and fly off into another dimension. Like you've definitely seen stuff, okay? So
I did like how I in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, like we said that it went too big and it was just like too much all thrown in there at the end. What I think really could have helped this scene in the way that they structured it, I mean, obviously it would have had to change the entirety of the ending, but what really could have helped this to make it feel like an older school Indiana Jones film is the bad guys make it through the portal. Like, Indy doesn't stop them. They make it through the portal, but nothing changes. Like, everything's still fine. And they're just like, oh, those guys, like, they miscalculate continental drift, and therefore they just are lost in time. I think that would have been a fine enough gruesome ending for wrapping it up and making it still feel old. But because Indy's along for the ride, it would be the same sort of thing of if Indy was still in the spaceship at the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where it's like, oh, okay, we're just going all the way.
So there is one element to it that I think kind of works thematically, is that when Indy wants to stay, there is something to the idea of, like, he's literally going to live in the past with all this artifact stuff that he's been pursuing his whole life. Like, there's something to that thematically, which we'll get to. Yeah. But I will agree that I think it's probably too much, and while Indy's always had some pulp to it, I think, you know, like I say, I enjoyed the Nazis getting, you know, killed and the plane crashing. I enjoyed some of the antics that happened because of it, but it absolutely is just like taking Indy from a, like, the wild as possible, the mysterious, like these things that can be somewhat supernatural, and yeah, sure, you see the Ark of the Covenant melt off some faces, like clearly these things exist, there is truth to what they're doing, but at this point, like you say, it's like he's done so much, and like he's like so many fantastical things at this point that it is like, okay, you've done time travel, and not only that, when it's all over and you're back home again afterwards, you're not sitting in shock that you've traveled through time and came back again. It feels like, it was another day at the Indiana Jones office, you know. It just doesn't feel big enough, or it feels too big, but then not big enough when they react to it. Right,
yeah. It feels like it should be a huge deal, and yet all the characters are like, yep, Tuesday. For me, though, I think my biggest problem, and I think the clear dividing line of what is too much and not enough, is when they broke that link of, they started with mysticism. They started with things linked to religion and belief and spiritualism, and then they moved over to sci-fi. They moved over to, oh no, like mathematics and physics will help us explain this. And I think once you try to put these explanations on it, once you make it where there is a clock that can just predict that there are fissures in space-time, it kind of loses something. I think it benefits it more from when, even once Indiana Jones fully reaches its peak of, like, he finds the Holy Grail, he finds the Ark of the Covenant, there's still this mystery to it we don't understand it.
It's still the unknown. The Force itself is something that can't just be explained. It is, like you say, mystical is the best word for it.
Meanwhile, we literally met the man who made this clock that can predict time fissures.
Well, it turns out he wanted to actually have someone from the future find it and come back and help, so with like knowledge, so they could win this war they're currently fighting
with the siege.
So it's like, oh damn, that's a lot to ask like whoever's going to stumble through that portal.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit, even if it would have worked, kind of a big ask of how much is really going to be able to come through and help you fight off this Roman legion.
Yeah. Also, it's lucky on his part though that the miscalculations of Mikkelsen led to exactly where he wanted people to come to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
No, like again, when I said we entered the point of contrivances, we never left.
yeah,
Like we're
that's
still
true.
in the contrivances.
So the big thing here, though, is that Indy decides he's not going to go back. He's just going to stay here. This is kind of wondrous. He's been obsessed with all these types of people and like things his entire life. I'll stay here. And Helena is trying to convince him, no, you have to go back. This is not your time. You have to come back to, the future. And he's like, for who? And I was like, is this going to actually do this like ballsy ending to his story where he gets to live in the past with all these things? I thought
I wanted him to.
Maybe it will. No, here's the thing. I actually like that. I like how this actually ultimately plays out. Like these last few minutes of the film, I actually quite like for the most part, which is she makes the choice for him by punching him and knocking him out, right? And that's when we cut to him waking up again, and he's got back because he got shot at one point randomly during all the action.
Okay, actually, no, that is something I need to bring up. He was shot in the heart, and he keeps going for 45 minutes.
Whatever. I don't want to sidetrack. Let's stay on this.
All right.
So he wakes up, and he's all bandaged up, and he's coming up, and in comes, or she, I think Helena's already there with Teddy, and then Salah, eventually comes in with his grandkids, and eventually Marion comes in as well, right?
Yes.
And I think even before they walked in, though, I think what I liked about this, like, Helena making the choice for him and forcing him, is I immediately got what it was trying to do, what the director was actually trying to, like, get out of this movie, which is that this is a man who basically doesn't feel like he's got anything to live for anymore. He's just kind of like going through life. Like we see him drinking for breakfast. We see him not really connecting to anyone. He feels like a relic, and he thinks he's lost his son. He thinks he's lost his wife. All these things, and he's basically this is basically a suicide. Like he's basically saying, "I want to commit suicide because I have nothing to live for," and it's someone who cares about him who has to like force him to keep living, like out of kindness. I mean, obviously she punches him. But it's someone close to him who has to step in and say, no, I'm not letting you self-destruct. I'm taking you back with me. It's someone showing compassion for him. And I actually like that as an idea. And I got really sad as soon as I had these thoughts as I was watching this play out, because I was like, I wish the whole movie felt like it was building to that. Right. And this is where I was going back to that scene with Salah giving him the whip and the hat, because the way I can actually contextualize that, given this ending, that I think actually does really work, is the idea that his friends and family that still care about him, that are around him, are trying to make him become him, right? They're trying to say, hey, no, you're still Indiana Jones, so you're not this broken down old man, you're still, this fire's still in you, we want you to feel alive again, be Indiana Jones. And it really came full circle for me when Marion comes in and she says, Salah said that you're back, so are you back? And obviously I'm thinking John Wick. Yeah, people keep saying I'm back. Well, I'm thinking I'm back, right? But that's what made it click for me, is I'm like, this whole movie should have felt like everyone else around him was trying to make him be in it. And it's not, because part of me was thinking for a while, and I think I was wrong for thinking this. I was thinking, does this work? Because I don't really feel like there was a point where he decided that he was like feeling the passion again. But I think it actually works that he doesn't, because I think the point is that he isn't feeling the passion. He never truly believes and like wants to like be himself and live for himself again. And I think that's this ending where Marion comes in and it's kind of cold and awkward, and she's like, well, so are you actually back? And that ties into their marriage, like, because the implication we've had so far is that he couldn't console her, and I think the implication from her saying, so are you back, is saying the reason why their marriage devolved is partially because he did lose who he was. Like, he became this colder version of himself, and he lost to it. So I think in part when she says that, she's hoping that he's himself again, because she does want to be with him. She doesn't want to, just be apart. And then it does make, and I'm glad we watched them all in the run up to this, because I would not have like got the reference that they make for the sweet moment, which is she says, it doesn't hurt here, and then he kisses that spot. It doesn't hurt here either, and then he kisses that spot. That's of course a callback to that one intimate scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark on the boat in that movie.
Practically a throwaway scene in that movie, but really, really comes back home here.
It really, really comes back home here. So this ending was like, do you know what? There's actually a really poignant. And this is the funny thing. It's not even about him being old. Like the themes about him being old and a relic are definitely in there. But this particular point, you could do this with any character of any age. Oh, yeah. It's about a character who has lost the will to live and was ready to give up. And it's the people around him who say, no, we're not letting you do that because we care about you. And then ultimately him realizing, you know what, over the course of that journey, I did find myself again. I'm Indiana, effing Jones. Like, and the idea that the people around him are trying to like push him into it and saying, no, you can be this again. This is who you are. This is why we love you. Like, and I think if the movie really actually like felt like it was focused on that for the entire time, and I do genuinely think them going out of their way to have traditional Indiana Jones style action and adventure scenes, it got in the way of what the actual interesting story of the movie was, which was this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's I agree wholesale. I think that it is the core of the story is a man who is just basically trying to find something to live for. That's the whole point of that one line, and I think that line sings up is he's like, you need to come back with us, and he just says, for who? He has nothing there left to live for. This is at least his passion, this thing that he cares about, and he wants to stay back there in the past. But it isn't something that's in the future that's waiting for him. He has nothing there anymore. I agree wholesale that that's a really solid theme, but that's kind of the reason why I wanted it to end the other way of him staying in the past, is because I don't feel like the movie did that. I feel like it wanted to. I feel like it had these aspects to it that could have been explored so much deeper with that. But once you get stuck in the I think the biggest problem is that you were saying that he doesn't really feel like he wants to be Indiana Jones. That's what this entire plot revolves around. Meanwhile, I just watched 2 hours of him being Indiana Jones. I watched him diving underwater. I watched him getting into gunfights and whip fights and chase scenes. It didn't feel to me like he didn't want to be there. It felt like we're told that he didn't want to be there after the fact.
It's a simple thing, but he should not have put that hat back on until the ending. Like he should have put the hat on after they had a romantic moment to symbolize wholeheartedly, like, and that would have justified more why we saw him in full costume in the extended like opening flashback. Is like you're like, if they had balls, they would have never put him in the outfit for the rest of the movie.
No. Until it would have worked so much better.
Yeah, until he symbolically puts the hat on at the very, very end to say, you know what, I am still Indiana Jones. Like, that would have meant something.
I'd even be okay with him putting on the hat, like, there's 2 points. One, when he starts doing all the puzzly bits in Archimedes' tomb. Not so much there, but it would have worked. The second part is when he is making his speech at the end there, when he's saying, like, I want to stay. And he puts on the hat then. If that's the first time, that would have been perfect.
Yeah, I don't know why he would have it on him though, there, like the whole time, but never wear it until that point. Whereas if he's back in his house, it makes sense that it's there because it's just back home.
That's fair.
Because the movie actually does end on a shot of him like taking the hat off the clothesline out the window. But the problem is this is like the 7th time in the movie you've done like a hat moment, so it just kind of felt a bit hollow. Yeah, I didn't really like that part of it, but the actual romantic moment and the general sentiment that it was going for with them at the end, I actually really liked. I just wish the rest of the movie felt like it was attached more, wholeheartedly to that.
I mean, it would have kind of gone against the message of he's back being Indiana Jones, but I think if you're making the message more so not he's back as Indiana Jones and more so that he's just back to the realm of the living, he's back to being surrounded by people who love him regardless of the exciting adventures he goes on.
Yeah, well, because I think that's another part of this ending is that he not only sees that Helena's there for him, he sees Sala and his kids are there as part of his family, and he sees Mary, and he sees this extended group of people who all care about him. That's part of it.
But I think a more powerful ending may have been, instead of him grabbing the hat off the clothesline, it blows off the clothesline. Like, it's gone. Yeah,
I agree, actually. Yeah, that would have made more sense. It's like, no, he's done like with that part of his life because now he's happy with all like these people that he's got. He doesn't need...
Yeah,
like,
he doesn't have to go on those adventures.
Worked. Yeah, like, it's slightly different, but it would have worked as well. Obviously, the thematic thing as well, that he's literally going to live in the past, and often people who can't move on from something, you would say they're living in the past. There's a bit of a cute thing there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem for me, and maybe this is just my stupid ass brain and how I'm reading this, but the fact that the last shot we see of Indy and Marion inside his apartment is them sharing a passionate kiss.
Yes.
And then we see, Helena downstairs walking down to the ice cream shop with the kids. And then he reaches out the window and grabs his hat. The first thing going through my mind is he's using that for a sex thing.
Maybe she just likes him to wear the hat during sex. That's all.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like That's the whole reason he keeps it around. That's the reason it was in a special leather bag when Sala picked it up. It was under his bed. Think about that.
Okay, I'm going to pose a question here. What if they did a lot of these beats not at the very end, right? But what if this scene, again, you've got a more downbeat plot with less action in it, and it's more this almost drama, effectively, of this grumpy old man. What if you did this moment, though, where he's having to make the choice to actually get involved in being Indiana Jones, and you have this scene with Marion, you have this "Am I back?" moment. What if you have that at the start of an Act 3, and then you can have your adventure finale with him, the one last ride where he's like, no, I'm still Indiana Jones. I've like patched, I've had these moments with my wife. I've realized that people care about me, and maybe it's them that are in danger. Maybe he's like, I need to be Indiana Jones to save the people I care about, and that's why I'll put the hat back on one last time.
So easy transition would be Helena does some betrayal, some major thing. Maybe she actually gives up the Graphicos to the Nazis, and then he just says, "Screw it, I'm not here to save you anymore," and he goes back home. But then she gets into trouble with the Nazis, like that, and he has to make that call.
I mean, I don't know. Like, you'd have to obviously rewrite. You'd have to do a lot of things. I'm just posing the idea that instead of doing it right at the very end, although I understand doing it there, if you do it, like, it's almost maybe more like a typical structure to do it at that point. Like, the lowest moment is, and then the uplifting moments when he realizes, no, I am still that person. My fire's back. I'm going to go fight the bad guy. Like,
I guess it depends on what kind of ending you're looking for, because with the ending we were given, it was pretty downbeat and sour of, this guy's given up on life right up until the very last, couple lines.
Which, by the way, my favorite part of the movie is these downbeat moments, like, as he's, like, sort of, like, contemplating this stuff. And
that's also one of the reasons that I kind of wanted it to end with him in the past, is that I kind of wanted there to be those scenes of people memorializing him in the present, and you see him just somewhat not entirely fulfilled, but just still happy with the way things turned out.
The problem I have with that, though, is that the best scenes in the movie are all the scenes in the apartment, pretty much, after he wakes up. Like, those moments where he sees the people who care about him realizing it, and then seeing Marion and patching up with her, it's the best part of the movie. And it's wild that the best part of this new Indiana Jones movie is the scene where two 80-year-olds stand in a kitchen and talk to each other. But it really is. It genuinely is the best part. And I think partly it's because it's like, when they're doing the action scenes, it feels that they're constantly working around the age. They're constantly working around the limitations they now have that they never used to have. So it feels like at least a little bit disingenuous. Whereas this part of the movie, it gets to be exactly what it wants to be. And it never feels, this specific scene, it doesn't have to pull punches. It doesn't have to make up for something it can't do. It's about two old people who have fallen apart because of a tragedy, and he's worked through his pain, and they can reconcile. And James Mangold is good at drama, and that's what this scene is. It's a drama scene, and that scene works. I think the problem is that fundamentally, because this is a Hollywood blockbuster that's meant to be a nostalgia throwback to a franchise, is what gets in the way of every interesting element that it otherwise is trying to do and move the character forward and give him a send-off that's, a bit more nuanced than just giving him the big happy ending, which is what Crystal Skull did. And that was a fine idea, because it's a fairly light-hearted, pulpy franchise, ultimately. But this, like, if they'd went full drama with this, and I get that a lot of people would, like, be like, why is it not an action movie? Like, I totally get that there would be a backlash to that, but it would be the ballsy thing to do that might actually make for the more interesting film. It's kind of like, this is a really good comparison to make, is the newer God of War games, or even Uncharted 4, right? I'm going to video games here, because, and this is the beauty of this, is that they didn't have to do this because it's video games and it's all CG anyway, right? It's all graphics, it's all in a computer. And even the voice actor Nolan North, who plays Nathan Drake, even though he's a bit older than the character, he could still voice the character probably for a long time before it would sound weird. So, but they made a conscious choice where after that original trilogy of games on the PS3, they did one more game, the fourth one, on the PS4. But they chose to do this thing where now he's a father, and now he's got kids, he's got a married man with kids, and we're going to tell this story of, like, he's pulled into one last thing, but it's kind of like he wants to, because he kind of misses the adventure, and it raises conflict. But by the end of the story, it's exploring all these mature ideas about, like, giving up, like, who you were when you were younger, because now you're in a different life, and you're in this married life with and it I actually think it's my favorite of the four games as far as story goes, because it felt like, no, we actually want to talk about someone who this is a great comparison because he's very Indiana Jones like in terms of he's treasure hunting, he's doing action scenes. He when you play those games, you must murder like 1,000 people by the time you get to that fourth game. But it's kind of dealing with like, okay, this guy had this really specific lifestyle, and now he's someone different. How has he matured? And it actually tells. And I think when the movie wants to actually focus on how is Indiana Jones as a character changed and what can we tell from him about him dealing with the fact that he's changed and that he's older and that he's went through these other things, it actually pokes on some interesting nuanced things. But a lot of the movies just, no, we have to have him in the hat and in a car chase or whatever.
Yeah, I want to bring this up. Obviously, we've already speculated on it, but I do want to bring this up that according to IMDb trivia, which obviously is fallible, I'm not taking it as
it's not it's not foolproof for sure.
According to the trivia, it says that John Williams stated in an interview that a quote new ending had to be shot, and he therefore needed to compose a new score for it.
Oh, interesting.
So at some point there may have been. I mean, it's at least a different enough scene where an entirely different score had to be made. So,
but I wonder because I think the obvious thing you're about to suggest. Was it a different choice made about him coming back or not? I actually think that's too
much.
Yeah, if anything, I would suggest maybe they didn't get Karen Allen originally. Maybe they didn't have Marion, and they rewrote the scene to include her, and that's like what the big that changes the scope of it a bit.
Yeah, that's possible.
But I mean, maybe it was just the opposite choice, but I don't know.
I mean, for me personally, I think that. And I don't want to sound cynical, but it is a cynical idea, is that I think that Disney, they know they're not going to get another Indiana Jones out of Harrison Ford, but I don't think they want to put a capper on the series as a whole. They don't want there to be a satisfying ending, because if there is, no one will come back for whatever the next thing is. And I think that being able to, and when I say satisfying ending, I'm not saying in terms of like, this wasn't a satisfying finish to the film. I'm saying more so in the fact that Indiana Jones is stuck in the past and he's dead. Like, there's no possible way we're ever going to see Harrison Ford again. I think they're still leaving that door open for like, he could cameo, maybe, possibly.
Cameo, maybe, yeah. But that still feels pretty definitive though, as far as like this is definitely the swan song. Like,
I mean, so did Last Crusade, so did Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Yeah, they all felt like the last thing.
Well, yeah, but the difference is that he's almost dead. Yeah, the time has run out.
The first 20 minutes of this review was saying how the mouse doesn't stop when you're dead.
Well, okay, fair point. That's true, right? Of course, the sad reality for them is that it's not making that much money. So
true.
I highly doubt they're going to. And this is the thing. Like, they wanted to possibly do a Mutt thing like after the last movie. And it never even came close to happening because I think it did okay, but it did, I mean, it did better than this one did opening weekend, but it's not. And that's the thing, like Indiana Jones itself is a throwback to the serials of the 30s and 40s. And that was a movie that came out in the 80s. The entire original trilogy came out over the span of the 80s. And then Crystal Skull was kind of right in the middle or the early stages of 80s nostalgia time period. And they kind of capitalized what they could, but it wasn't enough to like instantly want more sequels from a financial level.
Right.
And to an extent, I think 80s nostalgia is kind of ever present because it's still going today, really. But
yeah,
I think like the Zoomers, to use a word that I don't like using, the younger people than us, like I don't think they like. Did they know Indiana Jones really? Like I think there was enough people in 2008. Who grew up watching them on TV, that there was a reasonable audience of like young people. I feel like now that like that, like even us who grew up watching them on TV and saw the first one we saw in theaters was Crystal Skull. We're all in our 30s now, pretty much.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm thinking is that it's not so much that they know Indiana Jones as it was to begin with. They just have a nostalgia for the thing they grew up with, which in this case was Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It was more like that was 15 years ago. Anybody who was 8 years old when they watched that at their impressionable age, they have disposable income. They are able to now see this movie.
I think that's why it's done less, is because I don't think a lot of people have that much nostalgia for Crystal Skull because it's not as good.
I don't think that many people have that much disposable income, technically. But.
Yeah, that's also true. I mean, my theater tickets all just went up in price in the last couple of weeks. So that's rough. But yeah, it's a weird thing to think about that, but certainly we're at this weird stage where now like 90s stuff is more than, if anything, we're almost past that into the early 2000s at this point.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering. Like, so I guess from the thing is that it took 15 years between Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to get out this movie.
Yeah.
Do you see any reality where in 15 years we're going to have another installation in some form?
I think eventually, I think everything will be tried again eventually. The only difference is this time it won't be Ford. It'll be a fresh reboot if they do it.
It'll be something. I mean, honest to God, what I believe is actually going to happen is that it's going... I mean, this came out in 2023 and it was set in 1969. So fast forward 12 years, 2035, we're going to get something, and it's going to be because it's released in the year that Indiana Jones is released. It's going to be something set in like 1981 to some regard. And they're going to see Indy in theaters. They're going to see it up on the screen.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I don't really have an appetite for any more. I didn't really have an appetite for this one, to be honest. But
yeah.
But after this, there's some nice ideas in it, and there's things that I've complimented a few things throughout, but the larger big picture problems are definitely there, and there's the things that I just like. They just dragged in the movie. Is it better than Crystal Skull? I would say it is, but that's probably the height of its achievements here, in the sense that even Temple of Doom, which I don't like that much, I think because of the time that movie was made in, and this goes back to something I said right at the start, is that still feels very much of those other two films, even if it's the one that I like the least, in that it's a lot of practical effects, it looks very similar, it's shot in film like those other two are. Everything about it feels like it's part of that lineage in a more genuine way. And because of that, even though there might be some story beats in this one that I technically like more, I think Temple of Doom is still overall better because it feels more authentic. It feels like an authentic Indiana Jones movie in that sense, that I don't think to some extent this does. And it's not because of any mistakes made on anyone's part, it's just because when enough time passes, I felt the same way when they did Die Hard 4, never mind 5, is that at a certain point, he just doesn't feel like John McClane anymore. He's aged too much and he's not that guy.
No. I mean, it's I think you bringing up video games was a good point there, in that in video games, you can have them eternally be whatever age you want. They never have to age. Mario is going to be vaguely 30 until he just explodes.
And he's a bit more of a cartoon character. I think it's interesting that some of the more mature games, I was talking about Uncharted and God of War. And when I say mature, I don't mean to diss the other ones. I just mean in terms of they're telling stories with narratives that are like more human. They are making the choice because they realize that, like, try to keep an ongoing, because Mario doesn't really have an ongoing story, right? Mario just kind of exists in a Simpsons-like ever state, and that's fine. But Uncharted, had an ongoing story, and they realized that what was interesting to them was to take the story forward and do something that closed off the character and age him up and do it properly.
Right.
And they did it as a creative choice rather than because they had to. And I think what's interesting in the movie world is that we're doing the opposite, where because we want to have the old actors come back, we're reshaping the story to try and fit the fact that they're all old now. And we see it time and time again. The new Halloween movies with Jamie Lee Curtis running about in her late 70s fighting Michael Myers. And
well, it's something that comes up, and I've seen a couple things about this, is that especially, we're in the comic books, and there's this thing where every single era is defined by whatever the people who are currently writing were reading when they were kids. Like, that's constantly just been a thing where it rotates out on about like a 25 to 30 year basis. You're always looking back that far. This is that same sort of thing where you've got this movie that was great in the 80s and all that, but I think the biggest thing is that the people who are writing it, the people who watched these movies and enjoyed them when they came out, they're aging with the characters. They are coming across these same developmental points in life. The people who are writing these movies, I mean, not technically writing, but the people, you get into that headspace, the audience, I guess, that went to go see the original Raiders, they are at this age where they are coming towards like retirement age, and they're trying to define like, what do I do with my life when I have nothing left in it?
Well, that's why the story would work better if it focused more on that. Like,
Right.
if anything, I think
But
it alienates them more if he's still doing things that someone in this age like is less believable to be
right.
doing.
But I'm saying that's why it also happens in video games and such like that, is that the developers behind the scenes, they're also aging. They're having kids. They're growing into different stages of life. And I think it's this strange battle between wanting to have this narrative structure that follows a real life and can age with the audience and never letting an IP die. These are two
Yeah.
things that cannot coexist, and yet they are forced to.
Yeah, and honestly, it is getting tiring and frustrating. I think big blockbusters right now are suffering from this a lot, and it is making a lot of them. I'm excited to see the new Mission Impossibles at some point because they they do focus on stunts. They have their own unique. I mean, it's unique now anyway. That they have that focus, and they're good because of that. And to be fair, like for different reasons, both Oppenheimer and Barbie, which are released in the same day,
Yes.
like they're both offering some. I mean, Barbie is an IP. Don't get me wrong, but it's like they've not actually done a big movie like Barbie like this before, so it is a new thing, and it seems to have a creative vision behind. Greta Gerwig, who's making it, seems to be really, So it's.
I mean, I agree, but I can already see the projection of this movie does great. They make
yeah.
Barbie 2, same cast. Barbie 2 kind of doesn't do as well, so then it goes into straight to streaming videos, and eventually we get CGI every third month of Barbie and the blank. I've never I understand from the point of if you've got a long running franchise, but I think once you hit the number 5, honestly, once you hit the number 4, but definitely when you hit the number 5. You really got to think about either wrapping it up or having a real reason to keep going.
Yeah. So that is a bit of a tangent there, but that is our thoughts on the movie. We'll rate it now at this juncture, David.
I mean, I hope you're okay with me sitting here for another 10 minutes just coming through with this, because this is tough. This is a tough one for me. Because like we've said this whole time, there are so many aspects of this that worked, but it's the fact that they weren't peppered in throughout the whole movie. It felt like there were large swaths of this movie that were kind of just forgettable, all things considered, kind of just not what I wanted to see. But the parts that I did enjoy, I really enjoyed. I was sitting front row. I could see nothing except Indiana Jones, and I loved it. So in terms of a rating for this, I think I'm going to come down. I'm going to come down to the 6. It's better than average. It is a fine movie. It's enjoyable enough. I mean, if you got a kid or something like that who's like vaguely interested in this stuff, oh, go for it. There's no better way to waste 2.5 hours. I guarantee you that kid will be quiet the whole damn time. But in terms of people who have grown up with indie, who have really wanted to get back to that golden age, this ain't it. It may be taking the big swings of nostalgia, but it is kind of just nostalgia in the end.
Yeah. Honestly, I was thinking about it since I watched it and wasn't really sure exactly where I landed number-wise. I think it does at least try some things. Mangold tries to... Because he did it very well with Logan. And interestingly, with Logan, I think the action in that was also the weakest part of that movie. Yeah. But that movie did focus a lot more on the elements that did work about that, and that's why that rang truer by the time it finished. So I'm obviously going to rate it higher than Crystal Skull. I think I'm going 5.5. I think I'm just
5.5,
just
right?
Nudging slightly over that middle mark. But it's very mute. It's very tepid because there's just too much in it that I don't think.
I mean, 5.5 is what I was bouncing around to. Yeah. That's where I was jumping.
I think it comes down to is that I did just get bored of the action scenes. They weren't anywhere near as good for a start as the original movies, right? Because they weren't stunts and stuff. But on top of that, there was too many of them, and I just felt nothing from them at a certain point. I was just kind of. I perked up a little bit with the plane stuff right towards the end because I realized it was about to do something crazy. But a lot of the like I say, there was a lot of vehicle chase scenes. They got kind of old after a while.
can I just throw in one tiny little nitpick that
Sure.
because we jumped so quickly into the time stuff, I have a bother with this. The portal, the space sphincter
Yes.
that sends them through time, it is just a giant wormhole. Like it's just a giant portal. You go through and then you end up on the other side.
It's a portal that's apparently always obscured because it's always in the middle of a storm, is what it seemed to be saying.
I'll take that, whatever. My biggest problem is, if it is a portal, what does it matter how the continents were drifting? Like, it's still just the portal there. It doesn't matter where in the relation of ground it is. Unless this portal is constantly, like, drifting across the planet, and they just happen to find it at this one time.
Well, so...
Yeah, all right, that's all it was.
Well, I will say this. Keep in mind that Earth is moving through space, so it's maybe a case of, it's going to a different, like, portal in the past, because here's a different angle. Whatever angle you go through the portal at, it depends on which other portal in the past you'll pop out at.
Fair enough. I'll take any explanation.
That's all I've got for you. I don't know.
It was bothering me at the moment where I'm like, you're in a space portal. What does it matter what's underneath you? Anyway, we still have to decide, though. Does this movie make the cut?
No.
No? I mean, all right. How hard of a hit are you willing to give it, though? Do you think it's just full-on cut from the collection? Because honestly, I would put it as cutting it close.
I don't think so. I think the baseline we've established, I think this is too much in the middle mediocre for us to say it's... Like, I think it's kind of weird and that there's things in it to like, but ultimately I would not recommend it. Like, I just wouldn't.
Okay. I mean, I'm not going to push that hard against you. I just do want it on the record that I think it's a little bit better than that. But I do agree that it's in that sort of tepid area. Like, I think that, I mean, I gave it a 6. I think that's more than able to be kind of cutting it close. But if you say cut from the collection, I can agree that this movie can be skipped. And I think that is the biggest thing, is whether or not a person comes in like after the fact and says, should I even consider checking it out? And I think, nah, this one...
Sadly, I think this is still a case where you say watch the trilogy. And I don't... Yeah. I think you... And most people will probably just out of completion watch the rest anyway, but I would not recommend... I think if it went harder on the things that I liked and it was more of a consistent part of the movie and I felt like it built up to those legitimately good ideas and moments emotionally, I would have been more on board, and I'd have said this would have been like a really interesting, like, reflective drama about this character who is in a different place in his life. And it would have almost been like a going back to comic books, you know how like Bendis did that Daredevil End of Days, or even something like Dark Knight Returns. This would kind of effectively be Indy's Dark Knight Returns, and his like comeback, one last hurrah, but it's got a lot to say about who he is and how he's changed and blah, and I just think it's too light and all that stuff for most of the movie. So
that's fair.
There you go. That is Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. We did go relatively lengthy on that one.
I was trying to stretch this out an extra 20 minutes, get to the full length of the movie.
But that is the review. Of course, next week we start our new season. We'll be working on the Expendables franchise. Obviously, start with the first one and building up to the fourth new one.
Actually, I think because of our filming schedule, we've forgotten we're doing Christopher Nolan in between there.
Sorry, we're recording Expendables next.
Yes.
Yeah, I am talking complete nonsense. It is Christopher Nolan season coming up next. This is the problem with us being ahead in schedule and then having to go back for the new theater releases, is that my mind is in a completely different place than where this releasing is.
No, I get it.
Yeah. So Christopher Nolan season starts next week. It's kind of getting split in two because we have to slot in a little animated Turtles tangent in the middle, but we're going to be doing 6 Christopher Nolan movies all in, including Oppenheimer. So look forward to that. Kicking off with following his first film next week. So,
which I guarantee you haven't seen. Not you, Peter, but like the audience.
One or two of them might have.
Fair.
It's obscure, but I mean, I think the fact that it's been released by Criterion means that there's a chance that some people have seen it.
True, I forgot it was Criterion. That's fair.
So it's got it was a stage. It's got
It's got some notoriety.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's coming. Yeah.
Pete, if I was interested in other Criterion films, what else could I check out?
Well, we have a monthly show just reviewing Criterion movies. Coming up this month will be our 3rd episode, but we've already done The Wages of Fear, and we did Seven Samurai. So if you want to hear us talk about highbrow cinema, by all means, go check out that. And if you want to get even more content on a monthly basis, we have 2 bonus monthly shows on Patreon, one at the $3 tier, and then another one you can get access at the $5 tier. The first one is the monthly bonus episode that will tie in maybe loosely to what's going on. The Monuments Men is the one that's going out around the same time as this episode, which is a World War II movie, so it kind of ties into indie, kind of ties into some of the Nolan stuff. I mean,
there's Nazis taking stuff, so it's kind of straight up with this movie.
There's artifacts being stolen, and more art and paintings and stuff, but whatever. Similar enough. I mean, what are these artifacts if not just art from a long time ago?
Can't spell artifact without art.
I guess you can. No. That's very true. And then, of course, our other monthly show is Collector's Cut Extra Reels, which we do so bad they're hopefully good movies. And we are talking, Miami Connection, we're talking Dangerous Men, we're talking some of the famous things. In fact, coming up later this month on Patreon, if you're in the $5 tier or up, we are reviewing our first ever Neil Breen movie on Extra Reels. So,
oh god,
if you want to see us lose our minds a little bit, then check out that. But there you go. That's all the plugging. Check out the other shows on the movie channel. We've got a horror movie podcast that I do with Tim called Screams After Midnight. There's a science fiction podcast that I do with Tara called The Atomic Cinema Experiment. And both of those have been going much longer than this show. We just had 200 episodes on the Ace. Streams is 500 plus episodes.
I was gonna say, I went on to Patreon the other day just to see if we had uploaded any of the bonus episodes, and I saw Screams episode 584, and I was like, nope, that's too much. I can't even begin to imagine watching that many extra reels at that point.
Well, Screams isn't monthly for a start. It's just not been that many months. I think you're off by about 40 episodes. I guess
am I?
It's like 430
maybe it was 548.
Yeah, it's like 530 or 540ish. We're at.
All right. Either way, it was a lot.
If it was 580, I'd be like, we're getting close to 600. We're nearing that 600 mark. I'd be like shouting about that.
I'd be more interested in the 666th episode. That better be something special.
Yeah, it's not. Wait, no. Have we done the Omen? I don't think we have. Oh, we need to save the Omen then for
there you go.
For 666. Perfect. All right. Well, there you go. That has been Collector's Cut. Hopefully you enjoyed this very long episode. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and that belongs in Gary Busey's bathroom.